When invisible Omega Juliette saves a child from rogues, she discovers the girl is Princess Luna, daughter of the Alpha King. Her act of courage awakens forbidden guardian magic and thrusts her into royal politics where enemies will kill to keep an Omega from rising above her station. Now she must choose between safety and protecting the family she's come to love in a kingdom that believes some are born to rule, while others are born to serve. Chapter 1. Invisible in Plain Sight. Blood stained the hospital floor where Juliette's knees had scraped raw against the unforgiving tiles. Her third shift of the day, and her body screamed in protest. Yet she couldn't stop. Not when rent was due tomorrow and her cupboards held nothing but dust and broken dreams. The antiseptic smell burned her nostrils as she scrubbed, her wolf whimpering deep inside her chest. Around her, wealthy alphas strode through the corridors like kings surveying their kingdom. Their expensive shoes clicked against marble while their designer suits whispered of power she'd never taste. "Watch where you're cleaning, Omega." The voice sliced through her concentration. Juliette looked up to find Alpha Marcus Blackwood towering over her, his cruel smile promising pain. He was young, maybe 25, but his family's wealth had carved arrogance into every line of his face. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus stepped deliberately onto her freshly mopped section. His muddy boot left a perfect print on the gleaming surface. "Looks like you missed a spot." Heat flashed through Juliette's chest, but she swallowed it down. Fighting back meant losing her job. Losing her job meant starvation. "Of course, sir. I'll fix it right away." As Marcus walked away, his laughter echoed off the walls like breaking glass. The other alphas joined in, their amusement at her humiliation cutting deeper than any physical wound. Juliette dipped her mop back into the grimy water and started over. Her reflection stared back from the wet floor, hollow cheeks, dull brown hair, eyes that had forgotten how to hope. 23 years old, and she looked ancient. The wolf inside her pressed against her ribs, wanting to fight, to show these pompous alphas what an Omega could do when pushed too far. But Juliette had learned long ago that survival meant silence. Her shift ended at midnight. The hospital's night security barely glanced at her as she gathered her cleaning supplies. To them, she was furniture, necessary but invisible. Outside, October wind cut through her threadbare jacket like ice through flesh. She pulled it tighter, but the cold had already settled into her bones. Winter was coming, and she couldn't afford heating bills. The lower district stretched before her like a scar across the city's face. Broken streetlights cast uneven shadows while the scent of desperation clung to every corner. This was where the pack's unwanted lived: Omegas, elderly wolves, and anyone else deemed unproductive by Alpha Society. Juliette's apartment was 12 blocks away. Taking the main roads meant safety, but also meant bus fare she couldn't spare. The alley shortcut would save her $3, enough for bread tomorrow. Her stomach made the decision for her. The alley mouth gaped like a hungry beast, but Juliette had walked this path 100 times before. Broken glass crunched under her feet as she navigated between overflowing dumpsters and puddles that reeked of things she didn't want to identify. Halfway through, strange howls echoed from the forest beyond the city limits. They sounded wrong, wild and uncontrolled, nothing like the disciplined voices of pack wolves. Rogues. Juliette quickened her pace, but the howls followed her, growing closer with each step. Her wolf's hackles rose, sensing danger in the darkness ahead. That's when she heard it. A child's scream, high and terrified, cutting through the night like a silver blade. Chapter 2. The Shortcut to Hell. "Please, someone help me." The little girl's voice cracked with pure terror, and Juliette's feet stopped moving before her brain caught up. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run, to pretend she hadn't heard anything, to save herself. But that scream, it was the sound of innocence being destroyed. Juliette crept toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. The alley branched off into a dead end, and there, trapped against a brick wall, stood a child no older than 6. 3 massive wolves circled her like predators toying with wounded prey. Even in human form, their rogue nature was unmistakable. Wild hair, torn clothes, and eyes that held no spark of civilization. They moved with the fluid grace of born killers. The little girl was beautiful in the way only royal children could be. Her dress was pristine white silk, her golden hair catching what little light filtered through the darkness. A princess from a fairy tale dropped into a nightmare. "Look what we found," the largest rogue purred, his voice rough as gravel. "A pretty little alpha pup, all alone in the dark." "The king will pay handsomely for her safe return," another added, circling closer. "Who says we're returning her?" The third rogue's grin revealed teeth filed to points. "Pretty thing like this could be worth more than money." Juliette's stomach lurched. She knew what he meant. The stories whispered in the lower district. Children who disappeared, never to be seen again. The smart thing would be to back away slowly. Call the authorities from a safe distance. Let someone else handle this. But the child's eyes found hers through the darkness, wide with hope and desperation. In that moment, Juliette saw herself at 6 years old, alone, terrified, abandoned by a world that didn't care about disposable Omegas. Her wolf surged forward, protective instincts overriding common sense. "Hey!" Juliette's voice rang out stronger than she'd heard it in years. "Leave her alone." The rogues spun toward her, surprise flickering across their faces before transforming into predatory interest. "Well, well," the leader drawled. "Looks like dinner just got more interesting." Juliette's hands shook as she searched for anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around a broken pipe lying near the dumpster. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Run!" she shouted to the child. "Get out of here!" But the little girl was trapped, the rogues blocking every escape route. The first rogue lunged at Juliette with inhuman speed. She swung the pipe wildly, connecting with his shoulder. He howled in pain and fury, but the blow barely slowed him down. His fist caught her in the ribs, sending her stumbling backward. Pain exploded through her chest, but she stayed on her feet. She had to stay on her feet. The second rogue moved to flank her, while the third continued stalking the child. Juliette was outnumbered, outmatched, and probably about to die. But she was done being invisible. With a feral cry that surprised even her, Juliette launched herself at the nearest rogue. She wasn't trained, wasn't strong, wasn't anything special, but she was desperate, and desperation made people dangerous. The pipe caught him across the face, and this time he went down hard. Blood streamed from his broken nose as he struggled to rise. "You little bitch!" The leader's eyes blazed with murderous rage. "I'm going to tear you apart!" He shifted partially, claws extending as his wolf pushed toward the surface. This wasn't a fair fight. It was execution. That's when the thunder of hoofbeats echoed through the alley. Chapter 3. When Saviors Arrive. The elite royal guard arrived like avenging angels wrapped in midnight black armor. 6 massive war horses charged into the narrow alley, their riders moving with deadly precision. The lead guard's sword was already drawn, its silver blade gleaming in the darkness. "Stand down!" The captain's voice boomed with alpha authority. "By order of His Majesty, King Diego!" The rogues froze, their predatory confidence evaporating like mist. Even the most feral wolf knew better than to challenge the royal guard. But the leader was either braver or more stupid than his companions. With a snarl that was more beast than man, he completed his shift. His massive wolf form towered over Juliette, jaws snapping toward her throat. She threw herself backward, landing hard on the broken asphalt. The rogue's claws raked across her arm, leaving bloody trails that burned like fire. Captain Torres moved like lightning. His blade found the rogue's heart before the beast could strike again. The wolf collapsed in a heap, his dead eyes staring at nothing. The other 2 rogues didn't wait to see what happened next. They melted into the shadows between buildings, their footsteps fading into the distance. "Secure the area," Torres commanded. "Check for additional threats." Juliette lay gasping on the ground, her arm throbbing with each heartbeat. The little girl stood pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her perfect face. "Princess Luna." Torres dropped to one knee before the child, his voice transforming from battlefield command to gentle reverence. "Are you hurt, Your Highness?" "Princess Luna." The words hit Juliette like a physical blow. She'd saved Princess Luna, the Alpha King's only daughter, heir to the throne, the most important child in the entire realm. "I'm okay, Captain Torres," Luna whispered, her voice trembling. "The lady saved me. She fought the bad wolves." All eyes turned to Juliette, who was still sprawled on the filthy ground like discarded trash. The guards' expressions ranged from suspicion to outright hostility. An Omega in the same place as an attacked princess. It looked bad. "You." Torres pointed his sword at Juliette's throat. "Don't move. Explain your presence here immediately." I was walking home from work," Juliette stammered. "I heard her scream and—" "Convenient," another guard interrupted. "Very convenient that an Omega just happened to be in the right place at the right time." Luna stepped forward, her small hand gripping Juliette's uninjured arm. "She saved me. The bad wolves were going to hurt me, and she fought them." Torres studied Juliette with calculating eyes. "What's your name, Omega?" Juliette Moreau." "And your pack affiliation?" Heat flooded Juliette's cheeks. "I don't have one, sir. I'm unaffiliated." The guards exchanged meaningful glances. A lone Omega with no pack protection, she was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid to challenge 3 rogues. The rumble of an approaching carriage filled the alley. But this wasn't just any carriage. It was massive, pulled by 8 white stallions, with the royal crest emblazoned in gold on its sides. Juliette's blood turned to ice. There was only one person who traveled in a carriage like that. The door opened, and Alpha King Diego Valancourt stepped into the alley. Even in the dim light, his presence was overwhelming. He stood 6.5 feet tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of countless battles won. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his eyes, deep brown, almost black, seemed to see straight through to her soul. He moved with the fluid grace of a born predator, every step calculated and purposeful. The very air seemed to bend around him, acknowledging his dominance. "Papa!" Luna broke free from the guards and ran to him. He caught her in his arms, and for a moment the terrifying Alpha King disappeared. In his place stood a father, holding his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Are you hurt, little star?" His voice was gentle, but Juliette could hear the barely controlled fury beneath it. "No, Papa. The lady protected me." Diego's eyes found Juliette over Luna's head. The intensity of his gaze made her feel like a butterfly pinned to a display board. "This lady?" He set Luna down gently, his attention never leaving Juliette. "She fought 3 rogues to save the princess," Torres reported. "Single-handedly held them off until we arrived." "Did she?" Diego approached slowly, like a wolf stalking prey. "And what's your name, little warrior?" "Juliette Moreau, Your Majesty." She tried to stand but stumbled, her injured arm making her clumsy. Without warning, Diego reached out and steadied her. His touch was gentle despite his obvious strength, and the scent of cedar and rain that clung to him made her wolf whimper with unexpected longing. "You're hurt," he observed, noting the blood on her arm. "It's nothing, Your Majesty. Really." "Nothing?" His eyebrows rose. "You fought 3 rogues to save my daughter, and you call your injuries nothing?" Luna tugged on his sleeve. "Papa, she was very brave, like the knights in my stories." Diego studied Juliette for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Indeed she was. Captain Torres escorts Miss Moreau to the palace. I want her injuries treated by our best healers." "Your Majesty, I really should get home," Juliette began. "The palace," Diego repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "I have questions about tonight's attack. and I prefer my witnesses alive and healthy." It wasn't a request. As the royal carriage rolled through the night toward the palace, Juliette pressed her face to the window and watched her old life disappear behind her. She had no idea she would never see the lower district again. Chapter 4. Palace of Whispers. The royal palace rose from the earth like something born from dreams and nightmares combined. Towering spires pierced the sky, while massive walls enclosed gardens that sparkled with morning dew. Everything was built on a scale that dwarfed human understanding. Because it wasn't built for humans, it was built for wolves who commanded kingdoms. Juliette had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying. The carriage stopped before golden doors that stood 3 times her height. Royal guards flanked the entrance, their armor polished to mirror brightness. They watched her with the careful attention reserved for potential threats. "Miss Moreau," Captain Torres appeared at her elbow. "His Majesty requests your presence in the Blue Salon." Juliette had no idea what a Blue Salon was, but she followed Torres through corridors that gleamed like jewels. Portraits of ancient Alpha Kings stared down at her with eyes that seemed to judge her worthiness. Servants in pristine uniforms moved silently through the halls, their gazes sliding past her like she was invisible. Except here, invisibility felt different. Not like the dismissive ignorance she'd known in the lower district, but like careful observation from people trained to notice everything while appearing to notice nothing. The Blue Salon was aptly named. Everything from the silk wallpaper to the massive chandelier sparkled in shades of sapphire and azure. Juliette felt like a dirt stain on a priceless painting. "Sit," Torres gestured to a chair that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. Princess Luna burst through a side door, no longer wearing her torn dress. Instead, she was clothed in a simple pink gown that somehow made her look even more regal. "Juliette," Luna ran to her, throwing small arms around her neck. "You came to the palace." "Yes, Your Highness." "Just Luna," the little girl corrected. "You saved me, so we're friends now." "Friends don't use titles." The warmth in Luna's voice made Juliette's chest tight. When was the last time someone had called her friend? When was the last time anyone had looked at her like she mattered? "Luna." Diego's voice carried gentle warning as he entered the salon. "Let Miss Moreau breathe." He'd changed clothes since the alley. Gone was the practical traveling attire, replaced by royal regalia that emphasized his commanding presence. A crown of silver and sapphires rested on his dark hair, while his midnight blue jacket bore the royal crest in golden thread. Yet despite the formal clothing, his eyes remained warm when they looked at his daughter. "How is your arm?" he asked Juliette. "Much better, thank you." The palace healers had worked miracles, leaving her skin unmarked but tender. "I should probably return home now. I have work tomorrow." "About that." Diego settled into the chair across from her, moving with the controlled grace that marked all his actions. "I've taken the liberty of investigating your background, Miss Moreau." Heat flooded Juliette's face. "Your Majesty, I haven't done anything wrong." "Haven't you?" His tone remained neutral, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "Juliette Moreau, age 23, born in the southern provinces to parents unknown. No pack affiliation, no family connections, no social ties of any significance." Each word felt like a small cut. This was her life laid bare. Empty, meaningless, forgettable. "You work 3 jobs, Diego continued. "Hospital cleaner, postal clerk, and evening dishwasher at Murphy's Tavern. 60-hour weeks for wages that barely cover rent in the lower district's worst building." "I get by," she said quietly. "Do you?" He leaned forward slightly. "Because from where I sit, you look like someone with nothing to lose. And people with nothing to lose sometimes do desperate things." The accusation hit her like ice water. "You think I staged the attack? That I worked with those rogues? It would explain how an untrained Omega managed to fight off 3 killers. I got lucky." The words exploded from her before she could stop them. "You think I planned to get my arm shredded? To nearly die in some alley?" "Papa!" Luna's voice cut through the tension. Juliette isn't bad. She saved me. Diego's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. I know, little star, but I have to be careful. People want to hurt our family, and they're not always honest about their intentions. Then ask her, Luna declared with the simple logic of childhood. Ask her why she helped me. Diego's gaze returned to Juliette. Very well. Why did you help her? The question should have been easy. She'd done the right thing, protected an innocent child, risked everything for a stranger. But sitting in this palace, surrounded by wealth and power she'd never imagined, Juliette suddenly felt small and foolish. Because she was scared, she whispered. And nobody should have to be that scared alone. Something shifted in Diego's expression. The calculated assessment faded, replaced by something warmer, more human. I see. He was quiet for a moment, then stood. Miss Moreau, the attack on my daughter was not random. Someone is targeting the royal family, and last night was merely the latest attempt. I don't understand what that has to do with me. You saved Luna's life. You've proven you're willing to protect her, even at great personal cost. Diego moved to the window overlooking the palace gardens. I'm offering you a position, not as a servant, as Luna's companion and protector. The words hit Juliette like a physical blow. Your Majesty, I'm just an Omega from the slums. I'm not qualified to... You're qualified by the fact that you fought 3 rogues to save a child you'd never met. He turned back to face her. The position comes with private quarters, excellent wages, and Luna's safety as your primary responsibility. But the court will never accept... The court will accept what I tell them to accept. His voice carried the steel of absolute authority. The question is, will you accept? Juliette looked at Luna, who was watching her with hopeful eyes. Then she looked around the blue salon, at the luxury and safety it represented. A chance to matter. A chance to be more than invisible. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I accept. Diego smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Excellent. Captain Torres will show you to your quarters. As Torres led her from the salon, Juliette caught sight of herself in a mirror. The same hollow-cheeked Omega stared back, but something in her eyes had changed. She looked like someone who might actually have a future. Behind her, she didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows. Lady Catherine Westbrook, Diego's cousin and one of the court's most influential voices. Catherine's beautiful face was twisted with rage as she watched the lower district nobody walk away with everything Catherine had schemed years to achieve. This wouldn't stand. This couldn't stand. The Omega would learn that some places weren't meant for her kind. Chapter 5. Lessons in Cruelty. 3 days in the palace taught Juliette that wealth and cruelty often wore the same silk gloves. Her quarters were larger than her old apartment, with a 4-poster bed, private bathroom, and windows that overlooked the rose gardens. For someone who'd slept on a mattress on the floor, it felt like heaven. But heaven came with devils in designer gowns. Oh my. Lady Catherine Westbrook's voice dripped false sweetness as she entered Luna's playroom. I hadn't realized we were allowing street urchins to handle royal children now. Juliette looked up from the book she'd been reading to Luna, her cheeks burning. Lady Catherine was everything Juliette wasn't. Tall, elegant, with golden hair swept into an elaborate style. Her dress probably cost more than Juliette used to make in a year. Lady Catherine, Luna said politely, though her small body pressed closer to Juliette. We're reading about brave knights. How quaint. Catherine's green eyes fixed on Juliette with predatory interest. And what exactly are your qualifications for this position, Miss Moreau, Juliette Moreau? She stood, fighting the urge to bow. Diego had made it clear she wasn't a servant. And my qualification is that I saved Princess Luna's life. Ah, yes, the convenient rescue. Catherine circled them like a shark scenting blood. How fortunate that you just happened to be in the right place at the right time. It wasn't fortunate for me, Juliette said quietly. I nearly died. Did you? How tragic that would have been. Catherine's smile was sharp as a blade. Though I suppose death is preferable to some fates. After all, there are worse things than dying, like forgetting one's place. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Juliette's wolf stirred uneasily, recognizing the dominance play. Lady Catherine? Luna's voice carried surprising authority for a 6-year-old. Papa says Juliette is my friend and protector. He won't like it if you're mean to her. Of course not, little princess. I would never dream of being unkind. Catherine's tone remained pleasant, but her eyes promised retribution. I was simply welcoming our newest resident to court life. After Catherine left, Luna tugged on Juliette's sleeve. Don't listen to her. She's always angry because Papa won't marry her. What? She wants to be my new mama, but Papa says no. She thinks if she's mean to other ladies, he'll pick her instead. Luna's nose wrinkled. But Papa doesn't like mean people. The revelation sent ice through Juliette's veins. She was standing between an ambitious noblewoman and the throne. That made her a target in ways she hadn't even considered. The next morning brought more subtle attacks. The seamstress who came to fit Juliette for appropriate clothing accidentally stuck her with pins. The kitchen staff forgot to send her meals. Servants gave her wrong directions that led to embarrassing encounters with court officials. But the worst came during Luna's afternoon lessons. Master Aldrich, Luna's tutor, was a thin man with watery eyes and a perpetual sneer. He clearly resented Juliette's presence in his classroom. Princess Luna, he said coldly. Perhaps your companion would be more comfortable waiting outside. Education is wasted on those incapable of appreciating it. Luna's face flushed with anger. Juliette is very smart. She knows lots of stories and she can do numbers in her head. Can she? Aldrich's eyebrows rose mockingly. How impressive. Tell me, Miss Moreau, what's the square root of 144? 12, Juliette answered immediately. Lucky guess. How about 289? 17. His sneer faltered slightly. Simple arithmetic. Let's try something more challenging. Who wrote The History of the Northern Campaigns? Master Cornelius Blackthorne in 1847. Though his account of the Battle of Silver Creek is disputed by Professor Helena Voss, who argues that Blackthorne's sources were biased toward the royal perspective. Aldrich's mouth fell open. Around the room, several other tutors had stopped their lessons to stare. How do you know that? He stammered. I like to read, Juliette said simply. The lower district library may not be fancy, but it has books. From that day forward, Aldrich's attitude shifted from dismissive to wary. He could no longer pretend she was just an ignorant slum dweller. But if some began to grudgingly respect her intelligence, others doubled down on their hostility. That evening, as Juliette walked Luna to the dining hall, Lady Catherine appeared with 3 other noble ladies. They formed a wall across the corridor, their silk gowns rustling like threat displays. Miss Moreau, Catherine purred. How lovely to see you again. Ladies, this is the person I was telling you about. Lady Margaret Thornfield, a sharp-faced woman with calculating eyes, looked Juliette up and down like she was evaluating livestock. How extraordinary. She almost looked civilized in proper clothing. Though one can still smell the lower district on her, added Lady Victoria Ashford, wrinkling her nose. Some stains never wash out. Luna stepped protectively in front of Juliette. That's not nice. Juliette smells like flowers. Children are so innocent, Catherine sighed. They don't understand what breeding tells. Blood will always show, won't it, Miss Moreau? The words hit their target. Juliette's lack of family, of pack, of any noble connections. It was her greatest vulnerability, and they all knew it. Excuse us, Juliette said, trying to move past them. The princess needs her dinner. Of course she does, and I'm sure you know all about appetite. Lady Margaret's emphasis on the last word carried ugly implications. After all, the lower district is notorious for its hunger. They were calling her a gold digger, suggesting she was here for money, for advancement, for whatever scraps she could steal from the royal table. Heat flooded Juliette's cheeks, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Ladies!" King Diego appeared at the end of the corridor, his presence immediately commanding attention. His expression was pleasant, but Juliette could see the steel beneath the smile. "Your Majesty." Catherine dropped into a perfect curtsy, the other ladies following suit. "We were just welcoming Miss Moreau to court life." How thoughtful. Diego's tone was mild, but something dangerous flickered in his dark eyes. "I trust you're setting an excellent example of royal hospitality?" "Of course, Your Majesty. We live to serve." "I'm glad to hear it." He moved closer, and the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop. "Because I would hate to think that anyone in my court was making my daughter's protector feel unwelcome." The threat was subtle but absolute. These women might have noble blood, but Diego was their king. One word from him could destroy their social standing forever. "Papa!" Luna ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Can Juliette eat dinner with us tonight, please?" "Of course, little star. I was hoping she would." Diego's smile returned as he looked at his daughter, then shifted to Juliette. "Miss Moreau, would you join us? I find dinner-time conversation much more interesting when it includes brave and intelligent company." The dismissal was clear. The noble ladies scattered like leaves before a storm, their faces carefully blank. As they walked toward the royal dining room, Diego spoke quietly to Juliette. "I apologize for their behavior. Court politics can be complicated." "They're worried I don't belong here," Juliette said honestly. "Maybe they're right." Diego stopped walking. "Do you want to belong here?" The question caught her off guard. Did she? 3 days ago, her biggest ambition was avoiding eviction. Now she was questioning whether she deserved a place at the royal table. "I want to protect Luna," she said finally. "Everything else, I don't know." "Then we'll figure it out together." His voice was gentle, but there was something else there, something that made her pulse quicken. "You saved my daughter's life, Juliette. That earns you a place anywhere you choose to be." As they entered the dining room, Juliette caught her reflection in the polished windows. The same face looked back, but something had changed again. She looked like someone who might actually fight for her place instead of just accepting whatever scraps she was thrown. That, she was beginning to realize, was going to make all the difference. Chapter 6. Shadows and Revelations. The first assassination attempt came on a Tuesday morning, disguised as breakfast. Juliette was reading to Luna in the princess's sitting room when Martha, one of the kitchen maids, brought in a silver tray laden with pastries and hot chocolate. "Special treats from the kitchen," Martha announced cheerfully. "Cook thought Her Highness might enjoy them." Luna clapped her hands in delight. "Strawberry tarts! My favorite!" But something felt wrong. Juliette couldn't put her finger on it. Maybe the way Martha's hands shook slightly, or how she avoided eye contact. The maid's scent carried undertones of fear and guilt that made Juliette's wolf restless. "Wait," Juliette said as Luna reached for a tart. "Martha, did Cook specify these were only for the princess?" What do you mean, miss?" "Usually when Cook sends treats, there's enough for everyone. But this looks like exactly one serving." Juliette stood moving between Luna and the tray, almost like it was measured precisely. Martha's face went pale. "I don't know anything about that, miss. I just bring what I'm told." "Of course." Juliette picked up one of the tarts, examining it closely. The strawberries were perfect, the cream piped with artistic precision. Too perfect, maybe. "They look delicious. In fact, I think I'll try one first." "No!" Martha lunged forward, knocking the tart from Juliette's hand. It shattered on the marble floor, and immediately the room filled with the bitter scent of almonds. Poison. "Guards!" Juliette shouted, pulling Luna behind her. Guards, to the princess's chambers! Martha bolted for the door, but Captain Torres appeared in the entrance like an avenging angel. His sword was at her throat before she could take another step. Don't move, he commanded. Not even to breathe. Within minutes, the sitting room filled with guards while palace healers examined the poisoned pastries. Luna clung to Juliette's side, her small body trembling with delayed shock. Nightshade, announced Master Physician Garrett, his weathered face grim. Enough to kill a grown alpha, let alone a child. Death would have been unpleasant. King Diego arrived like a storm front, his usual composed demeanor cracking to reveal the fury beneath. His dark eyes swept the room, taking in the shattered pastry, the trembling maid, and his daughter pressed against Juliette's side. What happened? His voice was deadly quiet. Torres quickly explained, while Martha whimpered in the corner. With each word, Diego's expression grew darker. Who gave you the order? He asked Martha, his alpha authority pressing down like a physical weight. I can't. They'll kill me. They'll kill you anyway, Diego said matter-of-factly. The only question is whether you die as a traitor or as someone who tried to make amends. Martha broke down completely. Through her tears, she babbled about gold coins, threats against her family, and messages delivered by hooded figures who knew things they shouldn't know. The Shadowfang Pack, Torres concluded grimly. Has to be. They're the only ones with resources and motivation to infiltrate the palace. Shadowfang. Even Juliette had heard whispers of them in the lower district. Wolves who'd rejected pack society entirely, living as raiders and mercenaries in the wilderness beyond civilized lands. Papa, Luna whispered, is someone trying to hurt me? Diego knelt before his daughter, his fierce expression melting into tenderness. Some people are little star. But that's why we have guards and healers and... His gaze shifted to Juliette. And very smart friends who notice when things don't seem right. Juliette saved me again? Yes, she did. The weight of that realization settled over the room. If Juliette hadn't been suspicious, if she hadn't tested the food first, Luna would be dead. The heir to the throne, poisoned by a pastry in her own home. Miss Moreau, Diego stood, his attention focusing entirely on her. How did you know? I didn't know exactly. Something just felt off. Martha seemed nervous, and the portions were too precise. In the lower district, you learn to trust your instincts about danger. Your instincts saved my daughter's life. Again. There was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper. Something that made her very aware of how he was looking at her. I was just being careful. Careful. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his scent, cedar and rain and something uniquely him that made her wolf whimper with longing. Miss Moreau, in the past week you've fought 3 rogues and detected poison that fooled everyone else. That's not careful, that's exceptional. Heat flooded her cheeks. I'm not exceptional, Your Majesty, I'm just what? The question hung in the air between them. What was she? A slum Omega who'd gotten lucky? Someone who saw patterns others missed? Someone who'd learned to survive in a world that wanted her to disappear? I'm just someone who's had to pay attention, she said finally. When you're invisible, you notice things. People don't guard their words around you. They don't hide their true faces. Diego nodded slowly. And what have you noticed since coming here? The question was loaded with meaning. Around them, guards and healers continued their investigation, but Juliette was acutely aware that this conversation was shifting into dangerous territory. That palace walls don't keep out all the threats, she said carefully. That enemies can wear friendly faces. That Luna needs protection from more than just rogues in dark alleys. Exactly. Diego's voice dropped lower, meant for her ears alone. Which is why I need someone I can trust completely. Someone whose loyalty isn't tied to politics or personal gain. Before Juliette could respond, Lady Catherine appeared in the doorway. Her usual perfect composure was slightly cracked, her eyes darting between the poisoned pastries and Diego's intense focus on Juliette. "Your Majesty," Catherine's voice carried just the right note of concern. "I came as soon as I heard. Is Princess Luna safe?" "She is, thanks to Miss Moreau's quick thinking." "How fortunate." Catherine's smile was razor-sharp, though one has to wonder how an Omega from the slums developed such specialized knowledge about poisons. The implication hit the room like a physical blow. Several guards' hands moved instinctively toward their weapons. "Lady Catherine," Diego's voice carried winter frost, "are you suggesting that Miss Moreau was involved in an attempt to poison my daughter?" "Of course not, Your Majesty. I would never presume to make such accusations. I simply find it remarkable that someone with no formal education could identify poison so readily." "Perhaps," Torres interjected coldly, "Miss Moreau's survival instincts are better developed than those of us who've never had to worry about our next meal." Catherine's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Luna stepped forward. "Lady Catherine," the 6-year-old said with dignity that would have made any queen proud, "Juliette saved my life. If you can't say nice things about her, maybe you shouldn't say anything at all." The rebuke from a child stung more than any adult criticism could have. Catherine's composure cracked completely for a moment, revealing the fury beneath her polished exterior. "Of course, Your Highness. Forgive me." She curtsied deeply, but her eyes promised retribution. "I was simply concerned for your safety." "My safety is assured," Luna said firmly, taking Juliette's hand. "Juliette protects me." As Catherine retreated, Diego watched her go with calculating eyes. "Torres, I want a full investigation. Everyone who had access to the kitchen, everyone who knew of Luna's schedule, everyone who might have provided information to outside parties." "Yes, Your Majesty." "And increase security around Miss Moreau as well. If the Shadowfang Pack sees her as an obstacle to their plans, she's now a target too." The word sent ice through Juliette's veins. She'd gone from invisible nobody to assassination target in the span of a week. "Your Majesty, I don't need—" "You do." Diego's tone brooked no argument. "You've made enemies simply by protecting my daughter. That makes you family whether you realize it or not." Family. The word hit her harder than any poison could have. When was the last time someone had called her family? That evening, as guards took up positions outside her quarters and Luna slept safely in the royal chambers, Juliette stood at her window looking out at the gardens. Everything was beautiful here. Safe. Protected. So why did she feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, with enemies gathering in the darkness below? The answer came with a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, a hooded figure stood in the shadows of the corridor. "Miss Moreau." The voice was female, cultured but unfamiliar. "Someone wants to meet with you. Tonight." "Who?" "Someone who can tell you the truth about why you're really here, about what you really are." The figure placed a folded note in Juliette's palm. "The Rose Garden. Midnight. Come alone." Before Juliette could respond, the figure melted back into the shadows. Juliette unfolded the note with trembling fingers. Written in elegant script were just 4 words. "Your bloodline isn't dead." Chapter 7. Blood and Secrets. The Rose Garden at midnight was a maze of shadows and silver moonlight. Juliette moved silently between the carefully manicured hedges, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. But the note burned in her pocket like a brand, and the words echoed in her mind with relentless persistence. Your bloodline isn't dead. She'd always been told her parents were unknown, casualties of a rogue attack when she was too young to remember. The pack officials who'd processed her into the system had no records, no names, no family history. She was nobody, from nowhere, with nothing to claim as heritage. But what if they'd lied? A figure stepped from behind a marble fountain, and Juliette's breath caught. It was an elderly woman, perhaps 60, with silver hair braided down her back, and eyes the color of storm clouds. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd been powerful once, though age had softened her edges. "You came?" the woman said, her voice carrying the refined accent of old nobility. "I wasn't certain you would." "Who are you?" Juliette's hand moved instinctively to the small dagger Torres had insisted she carry. "My name is Elena Ravencrest, and 23 years ago I held you as a newborn while your mother bled to death in my arms." The words hit Juliette like physical blows. She stumbled backward, her wolf howling in recognition of something long buried. "That's impossible. My parents died in a rogue attack." "Your parents died because they were murdered," Elena said quietly, "by order of the previous Alpha King, Diego's father, because your mother carried a bloodline that threatened everything the royal family had built their power upon." The garden spun around Juliette. She gripped the fountain's edge to keep from falling. "You're lying." "Am I?" Elena moved closer, her storm-gray eyes searching Juliette's face. "Tell me, child, have you never wondered why your instincts are so sharp? Why you can sense danger before it strikes? Why you fought 3 rogues and survived?" "I got lucky." "Luck?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "You detected poison that fooled the palace's best guards. You fought off assassins with no training. You've caught the attention of the Alpha King himself, despite being a nobody from the slums." She paused. "That's not luck, Juliette. That's bloodline." "What bloodline?" Elena reached into her cloak and withdrew an ancient leather journal. Its pages were yellow with age, the binding cracked from decades of handling. "Your mother was Isabel Ravencrest, last daughter of the Guardian line. For centuries, our family served as protectors to the royal bloodline, not as servants, but as equals. We were born with abilities that complemented the Alpha's strength: enhanced intuition, protective magic, the power to sense threats before they materialized." Juliette's hands shook as she accepted the journal. The leather felt warm beneath her fingers, as if it recognized her touch. "But King Marcus, Diego's father, feared our power. He believed that guardians might one day challenge royal authority, so he ordered our extermination." Elena's voice cracked. "They called it the Purge of Shadows. In a single night, they killed every guardian they could find." "How did my mother survive?" "She was young, unmarked, living quietly in the southern provinces. She thought she was safe." Elena's eyes grew distant. "But they found her eventually. She'd just given birth to you. When the assassins came, she had minutes to act." Elena opened the journal to a page covered in elegant handwriting. Even in the moonlight, Juliette could see it was a woman's script, hurried but determined. She wrote this while they hunted her: instructions for your care, warnings about your heritage, and a spell to hide your true nature until you were old enough to protect yourself. Juliette read the words, her heart breaking with each line. "My dearest daughter, by the time you read this, I will be gone. But you must know the truth. You are the last of the Guardian line, born to protect and serve with honor. Your power sleeps now, but it will wake when you need it most. Trust your instincts. Trust your heart. And remember, we were never servants. We were partners." The spell she cast, Elena continued, was designed to hide your abilities until your 18th birthday. But strong emotions or extreme danger could trigger an early awakening. Like fighting rogues to save a child. "Like fighting rogues to save a child," Elena confirmed. "The moment you chose to protect Princess Luna, your true nature began to emerge." Juliette closed the journal, her mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you're in danger. The same forces that killed your mother are moving again." Elena's expression darkened. "King Marcus is dead, but his supporters aren't. They know what you are, and they'll stop at nothing to finish what they started." "The Shadowfang Pack?" "Among others. The poison attempt was just the beginning." Elena gripped Juliette's shoulders. "Child, You have a choice to make. You can continue hiding, pretending to be a simple Omega and hope they never find you. Or you can embrace your heritage and become what you were born to be. And what's that? A guardian. Diego's guardian. Elena's eyes blazed with ancient fire. The bond between your bloodlines runs deeper than politics or convenience. It's written in your very souls. That's why you risked everything to save his daughter. That's why he can't stop thinking about you. Heat flooded Juliette's cheeks. He doesn't he? Elena smiled knowingly. Tell me, when he looks at you, what do you feel? The honest answer was terrifying. When Diego looked at her, she felt like the most important person in the world. She felt seen, valued, cherished in ways that made her wolf purr with contentment. It doesn't matter what I feel, Juliette said quietly. I'm nobody. He's the Alpha King. You're a guardian, Elena corrected firmly. The last of a proud line of protectors. Your mother died to keep you safe, to give you the chance she never had. Will you honor that sacrifice, or will you let fear make it meaningless? Before Juliette could answer, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the garden. Torchlight flickered between the hedges as guards searched the grounds. Miss Moreau! Captain Torres's voice carried urgency. Miss Moreau, where are you? Elena pressed something into Juliette's hand, a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Your mother's. It will help focus your abilities when the time comes. When will I see you again? When you're ready to claim your true heritage. Elena stepped backward into the shadows. But remember, trust Diego. He may not know the full truth yet, but his wolf recognizes what you are. Listen to your heart, child. It will never lead you astray. The torchlight grew brighter. Any moment now, the guards would find them. Go, Elena whispered. But think about what I've told you. Your enemies are gathering, and soon you'll have to choose. Hide or fight. By the time Torres and his men reached the fountain, Juliette stood alone among the roses, her mother's pendant burning warm against her palm. Miss Moreau, thank the goddess. Torres looked around suspiciously. We received reports of movement in the gardens. You shouldn't be out here alone. I couldn't sleep, she said, which wasn't entirely a lie. The gardens seemed peaceful. Peaceful or not, it's not safe. Come, I'll escort you back to your quarters. As they walked through the moonlit paths, Juliette's mind raced with revelations. Guardian, protector, the last of her line. And somewhere in the darkness behind them, enemies who would kill to keep the past buried. But Elena was right about one thing. Hiding time was over. The moment she'd stepped into that alley to save Luna, she'd set events in motion that couldn't be stopped. Now she had to decide what kind of person she wanted to be when the storm finally hit. The pendant pulsed warm against her skin, and for the first time in her life, Juliette felt like she might actually have the strength to find out. Chapter 8, The Midpoint Shift. The second assassination attempt came during the Harvest Festival, hidden behind masks and moonlight and the laughter of a celebrating court. The great ballroom sparkled like a jewel box, its crystal chandeliers casting rainbow light across the marble floors. Nobles in elaborate costumes danced to music that seemed to float on the air itself, while servants circulated with trays of delicacies and wine that sparkled like liquid starlight. Juliette felt like an imposter in her borrowed finery. The deep blue gown, a gift from Diego, fit perfectly, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone could see through the silk to the slum dweller beneath. You look beautiful, Luna said, spinning in her own miniature gown of silver and white. Her mask was decorated with tiny diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. So do you, little princess. Juliette adjusted Luna's mask gently. But remember, stay close to me tonight. No wandering off, no matter how interesting the entertainment might be. I promise. Luna's eyes grew serious. Are the bad people coming to the party? I don't know, but if they are, we'll be ready. The truth was, Juliette's nerves had been on edge all evening. Since her conversation with Elena in the garden 3 days ago, she'd been hyper-aware of every shadow, every whispered conversation, every glance that lingered too long. "Your enemies are gathering." The words echoed in her mind as she scanned the crowd. Behind their elaborate masks, the nobles looked like beautiful demons, their true faces hidden behind silk and feathers and jeweled facades. "Miss Moreau." The voice belonged to Lady Catherine, who appeared at Juliette's elbow like a silk-wrapped viper. Her mask was gold and black, perfectly complementing her poisonous nature. "How lovely to see you embracing court festivities, Lady Catherine." Juliette kept her voice neutral, but her hand moved instinctively to check that Luna was still beside her. "I must say, blue is definitely your color, though I can't help but notice the gown bears a striking resemblance to one His Majesty commissioned for his late queen." Catherine's smile was sharp as broken glass. "How nostalgic of him." The barb hit its target. Heat flooded Juliette's cheeks as she realized Catherine was right. The gown was almost identical to portraits she'd seen of Diego's deceased mate. "I'm sure it's just a coincidence," Juliette managed. "Oh, I'm sure it is. After all, what would a king want with a pale imitation when he could have had the original?" Catherine's voice dripped false sympathy. "Though I suppose we all have our fantasies." Before Juliette could respond, the orchestra struck up a new piece, a waltz that drew couples onto the dance floor like moths to flame. "Miss Moreau." Diego's voice cut through the music, and Juliette turned to find him approaching through the crowd. He'd forgone a mask, his natural authority making disguise unnecessary. In his formal black jacket with silver trim, he looked like a king from the old stories, powerful, dangerous, and utterly compelling. "Your Majesty." She curtsied, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at his approach. "Would you honor me with a dance?" The request sent shocked murmurs through the nearby nobles. Kings didn't dance with Omega companions. Kings didn't single out servants for such public attention. But Diego extended his hand as if her answer was never in doubt. I don't really know how to dance like this," Juliette admitted quietly. "Then I'll teach you." His smile was gentle, encouraging. "Trust me. Trust me." The words echoed Elena's advice from the garden. "Trust Diego. His wolf recognizes what you are." Juliette placed her hand in his and let him lead her onto the dance floor. The waltz began slowly, giving her time to follow his lead. Diego was a perfect partner, strong enough to guide her, patient enough to let her find the rhythm, graceful enough to make her clumsy steps look intentional. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured as they spun through the other couples. "I feel like everyone's staring." "They are, but not for the reasons you think." His dark eyes met hers. "They're staring because you're the most beautiful woman in the room." "Your Majesty." "Diego," he corrected softly. "When we're dancing, just call me Diego." The intimacy of his name on her lips made her stumble slightly, but he caught her effortlessly, pulling her closer as they moved through the steps. "Better?" he asked. "Better." Though being pressed against his solid chest was doing nothing for her equilibrium. Around them, other couples swirled through the dance, but Juliette was acutely aware of only one person, the warmth of Diego's hand on her waist, the cedar and rain scent that made her wolf purr with contentment, the way he looked at her like she was precious beyond measure. "Juliette," he said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." That's when she smelled it. Smoke. Not the pleasant wood smoke from the fireplaces, but the acrid chemical scent of something burning that shouldn't be. "Fire," she breathed, her dance steps faltering. "What?" "There's a fire. Somewhere close." Her enhanced senses, awakened by weeks of stress and danger, picked up traces others would miss. And something else. The something else was harder to identify, a metallic tang that made her wolf's hackles rise, combined with the wild musk she'd learned to associate with rogues. "Luna," she said urgently, scanning the ballroom. "Where's Luna?" Diego's head snapped around, his own protective instincts flaring. They'd left the princess with her governess near the refreshment tables, but now? The governess stood alone, her face pale with panic as she searched the crowd. "Your Majesty!" She rushed toward them, her composure cracking. "Princess Luna. She said she needed the powder room, but that was 10 minutes ago. I can't find her anywhere." Ice flooded Juliette's veins. "The fire's a distraction. They took her during the confusion." Even as she spoke, shouts erupted from the corridor outside the ballroom. Servants ran past the doorway, carrying buckets of water toward some unseen blaze. "Torres!" Diego's command cut through the music and laughter. The captain appeared instantly, his expression grim. "Your Majesty, there's been an incident in the East Wing. Kitchen fire probably started by a fallen candle. We're handling it, but—" "Luna's missing," Diego said tersely. "This isn't a coincidence." Torres went pale. "I'll mobilize every guard in the palace." "No." Juliette stepped forward, her mind racing. "They'll be expecting that. A massive search will just drive them deeper into hiding." "Then what do you suggest?" Diego's voice was deadly quiet. Juliette closed her eyes, reaching for the enhanced intuition Elena had told her was her birthright. The pendant her mother had left her grew warm against her skin, and suddenly she could feel it, a faint trail of fear and desperation leading away from the ballroom. "They're still in the palace," she said with sudden certainty. "Close by. They want to make demands, not just disappear." "How can you possibly know that?" She opened her eyes to find Diego staring at her with an expression of dawning recognition. "Because I can sense her. I can feel how scared she is." It was impossible. It shouldn't be happening. But somehow, through the bond she'd formed by protecting Luna, Juliette could track the child's emotional state like a bloodhound following a scent trail. "The North Tower," she said suddenly. "They're in the North Tower." Without waiting for permission, she hiked up her ball gown and ran for the doors. Behind her, she heard Diego shouting orders, boots pounding on marble as guards mobilized for pursuit. But Juliette was already ahead of them, following an invisible thread of connection that grew stronger with each step. Elena had been right. The guardian blood was awakening, and with it came abilities she'd never dreamed possible. Now she just had to pray they'd be enough to save Luna before it was too late. The North Tower stairway spiraled upward into darkness, and somewhere above, enemies waited with a terrified child and plans that would shatter the kingdom. But Juliette was done being afraid. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Chapter 9. Power Awakened. The North Tower stairs spiraled upward like the inside of a shell, each step echoing with the weight of destiny. Juliette took them 3 at a time, her ball gown hiked up to her knees, the pendant around her neck blazing warm against her skin. Behind her, she could hear the thunder of boots as Diego and his guards followed, but she was moving faster than should have been possible. The guardian blood was singing in her veins. Each step upward brought Luna's terror into sharper focus. The child was alive but terrified, crying for her father while rough hands held her in place. Through their connection, still impossible but undeniably real, Juliette could sense 3 men in the tower room above. Not rogues this time. These were professionals. She reached the final landing and pressed herself against the heavy oak door. Voices filtered through the wood, and what she heard made her blood run cold. "Message is simple," a cultured voice was saying. "The king has 24 hours to abdicate in favor of his cousin. If he refuses, the princess dies." "And if he agrees?" This voice was rougher, less refined. "Then she dies anyway. Can't leave witnesses, can we?" Juliette's vision went red. These weren't kidnappers looking for ransom. They were assassins using Luna as bait for a coup. The door wasn't locked. They were arrogant enough to assume no one would find them in time. Big mistake. Juliette eased the door open just enough to see inside. The circular chamber was lit by candles, their flickering light casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Luna sat tied to a chair in the center of the room, her silver dress torn and her face streaked with tears. 3 men stood around her like vultures circling carrion. They wore the black leather of professional killers, and their weapons gleamed in the candlelight. "Papa will come for me," Luna said with more courage than any 6-year-old should have to possess. "And Juliette will come too. She always protects me." "Your papa won't even know where to look," the leader sneered. "And your precious Omega friend? She's probably cowering somewhere safe, like her kind always do." That's when Juliette stepped into the room. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "I'm here." The 3 assassins spun toward her, weapons rising with professional speed. But something strange was happening to Juliette's perception. Time seemed to slow, allowing her to see the exact trajectory of each blade, the precise timing of each attack. "Well, well," the leader drawled, recovering his composure. "The little Omega wants to play the hero. How touching." "Let her go," Juliette said, moving deeper into the room. "Your quarrel is with the king, not with a child. Our quarrel is with the entire royal line, including their pets." He gestured to his companions. "Kill the Omega. Make it messy. The king needs to understand the cost of defiance." They moved as one, but Juliette was already moving too. The Guardian awakening hit her like lightning striking the earth. Power flooded through her body, not the brutal strength of an alpha, but something more refined, more focused. Her senses exploded outward, allowing her to perceive every detail of the room with crystal clarity. She could feel the assassins' heartbeats, smell their intentions, predict their movements before they made them. The first assassin's blade passed through empty air where she'd been standing a heartbeat before. Juliette flowed around his attack like water, her hand finding a candlestick that became an improvised weapon. The bronze connected with his temple with a sound like ringing bells, and he dropped like a stone. "Impossible," the second assassin breathed. "She's just an Omega." "I'm a guardian," Juliette said, finally understanding what that meant. The second man came at her with a knife, but she could see his attack pattern as clearly as if he'd announced it. She ducked, pivoted, and struck, her elbow finding the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. He collapsed, paralyzed but alive. The leader backed away, his eyes wide with recognition and fear. "You're supposed to be dead. The bloodline was purged." "Missed one," Juliette said coldly. He pulled a crossbow from his back, the bolt aimed directly at Luna's heart. "Stay back, or the princess dies." But Juliette was already moving, her awakened abilities allowing her to calculate angles and timing with inhuman precision. She threw the candlestick in a perfect arc that knocked the crossbow from his hands just as Diego and his guards burst through the door. "Surrender!" Torres commanded his sword at the leader's throat before the man could reach for another weapon. But the assassin's hand was already moving toward a vial of clear liquid at his belt. Poison, Juliette realized. He'd rather die than be interrogated. "No!" She lunged forward, her guardian instincts screaming that they needed this man alive. Her hand closed over the vial just as he tried to drink it, and for a moment they struggled for control. That's when the strangest thing happened. Power flowed from Juliette's fingers into the assassin's mind, not to harm, but to heal. She could feel the layers of conditioning that had been imposed on him, the magical compulsions that drove his loyalty to the conspiracy, and she could break them. The man's eyes went wide as his free will returned for the first time in years. What did you do to me?" "I gave you back your choices," Juliette said softly. "Now choose wisely." The fight went out of him all at once. He collapsed to his knees, the weight of his crimes crashing down as the magical compulsions released their hold. They made me forget," he whispered. "Made me forget I had a daughter. Made me forget everything except the mission." Diego approached cautiously, his dark eyes fixed on Juliette with an expression of awe and something deeper. "What did you do to him?" "I broke the spell, controlling his mind." She turned to Luna, using a guardian-enhanced knife to cut the ropes binding the child. Are you hurt, sweetheart? I knew you'd come, Luna sobbed, throwing her arms around Juliette's neck. I knew you'd save me. Over Luna's head, Juliette met Diego's gaze. The question in his eyes was clear. What are you? Before she could answer, the freed assassin spoke again. Lord Marcus Westbrook, he said hoarsely. Catherine's father. He leads the conspiracy. They plan to strike tomorrow night, during the coronation anniversary. The entire royal family will be there. Torres and Diego exchanged grim looks. How many? Diego asked. 50 men, spelled like I was, with no choice but to obey. They'll come from 3 directions, the gardens, the servant entrances, and through the old tunnels beneath the palace. And their goal? Kill everyone with royal blood. Install Catherine as regent until she can marry someone they can control. The man's voice cracked. They've been planning this for years. Diego's jaw tightened. Take him to the secure cells. I want everything he knows about their plans. As the guards led the assassins away, Diego approached Juliette slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Your abilities, he said quietly. They're not normal Omega traits. No, she agreed. They're not. What are you, Juliette? She looked down at Luna, who was still clinging to her with absolute trust, then back at Diego. The time for secrets was over. I'm what I was born to be, she said simply. Your guardian, your protector, your partner, if you'll have me. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond simple employment. Diego's eyes blazed with recognition, with desire, with something that made her wolf sing with joy. Always, he said fiercely. In this life and whatever comes after. And there, in a tower room still warm with the echoes of battle, something shifted between them. The guardian had awakened. Now it was time to claim her destiny. Chapter 10. The Point of No Return. The War Council convened at dawn in the Chamber of Swords, its walls lined with weapons of kings past, and its table scarred by centuries of difficult decisions. Juliette sat at Diego's right hand, a position that sent shocked murmurs through the assembled nobles. Queens sat at the king's right, trusted advisors, equals, not Omega companions, no matter how useful they'd proven. The intelligence is reliable, Captain Torres reported, spreading maps across the ancient table. Lord Westbrook has been building his conspiracy for 3 years, ever since Queen Isabella's death. He sees the monarchy as weakened, vulnerable. And he's not entirely wrong, Duke Aldrich added grimly. Without a queen to secure the succession, without additional heirs. He glanced meaningfully at Luna, who was thankfully absent from this particular discussion. The succession is secure, Diego said coldly. Luna is my heir. A 6-year-old girl, Your Majesty. And if something happens to her... Aldrich spread his hands helplessly. The nobility will fracture into factions. Civil war becomes inevitable. Around the table, heads nodded with reluctant agreement. Juliette could feel the political currents swirling. Fear, ambition, calculation, and underneath it all, the sense that everything balanced on a knife's edge. Which is exactly what Westbrook is counting on, she said quietly. All eyes turned to her. Some hostile, some curious, others merely surprised that she'd spoken at all. Explain, Diego said, his tone making it clear he valued her opinion. He doesn't just want to kill the royal family. He wants to create chaos, then position himself as the only solution. Juliette stood, moving to the map. Look at the timing, the anniversary celebration, when every major noble family will be present, when the deaths will be most public, most traumatic. Creating a power vacuum that only he's prepared to fill, Torres said slowly, with Catherine as his puppet regent. Exactly. And if he succeeds... Juliette traced the territorial boundaries on the map. The kingdom fragments. The northern territories declare independence. The eastern duchies form their own alliance. And what's left, becomes a puppet state under Westbrook control. You seem remarkably well informed about treasonous strategies, Lord Blackthorn observed with barely concealed suspicion. One might wonder where such knowledge comes from. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Juliette felt the familiar heat of shame rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Diego's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Lord Blackthorn, Diego's tone was deceptively mild. Miss Moreau has saved my daughter's life twice and uncovered a conspiracy that could have destroyed the kingdom. If you have specific accusations to make them. Otherwise, keep your suspicions to yourself. Blackthorn flushed but subsided. Around the table, the message was clear. Diego's protection of Juliette was absolute. The question remains, Duke Aldrich said carefully. What do we do about tomorrow night? Cancel the anniversary celebration? And look weak? Give Westbrook exactly what he wants? Diego's jaw tightened. No, we go forward as planned. Your Majesty, the risk is manageable if we're prepared. Diego looked at Torres. How many men can we trust absolutely? 50 of the Royal Guard. Maybe 20 more from the palace staff. Torres's expression was grim. Against 50 conditioned assassins, in a crowded ballroom full of potential hostages. We need an advantage they won't expect, Juliette said suddenly. An idea was forming, dangerous but potentially decisive. Something that levels the playing field. What kind of advantage? She took a breath, knowing her next words would change everything between them. My abilities. The guardian powers that let me break their conditioning. Juliette, no. Diego stood so quickly his chair scraped against stone. You're not trained for battle. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand that I can free their assassins from magical control, turn their own weapons against them. She met his gaze steadily. I understand that I'm the only one who can do it. It's too dangerous. If something happens to you, if something happens to Luna, to you, to the kingdom. Juliette moved closer, close enough to smell his familiar cedar and rain scent. Diego, this is what I was born for. What my mother died protecting. Let me do what guardians were made to do. The room held its breath as the king and guardian faced each other across 3 feet of charged air. The power you're talking about, Duke Aldrich said slowly. That's not Omega magic. That's something else entirely. Yes, Juliette confirmed. It's guardian magic. The bloodline that was supposedly wiped out 23 years ago. The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Several nobles gasped, others leaned forward with predatory interest, and a few hands moved instinctively toward hidden weapons. Guardian bloodline, Lord Blackthorn breathed. But that's impossible. King Marcus made sure my parents died, Juliette said with quiet steel. But he missed one infant hidden in the chaos. Me. Duke Aldrich's calculating gaze swept over her with new understanding. That explains everything. The enhanced intuition, the ability to sense threats, the way you fought off trained killers. And it explains why Lord Westbrook is so determined to eliminate the royal family now, Torres added grimly. He knows what happens when a guardian bonds with an Alpha King. He knows how powerful that partnership becomes. Diego moved closer to Juliette, his presence warm and protective at her back. The guardian bloodline served the crown for centuries. They were partners, not servants, equals in everything but title. Until your father decided they were a threat, Juliette said softly. My father was wrong. Diego's voice carried absolute conviction. About many things, but especially about that. The weight of his words settled over the room. Here was the Alpha King, publicly acknowledging his father's greatest crime, validating the bloodline that had been declared extinct. Your Majesty, Duke Aldrich said carefully. If Miss Moreau is truly the last guardian, her value to the kingdom is immeasurable. She cannot be risked in battle. She cannot be kept from her destiny either, Diego replied. The choice is hers. All eyes turned to Juliette. She could feel the crossroads beneath her feet, Safety or purpose, hiding or fighting, the life she'd known or the one she was meant to live. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I learned from my mother's journal." She pulled out the pendant Elena had given her, its silver surface catching the morning light streaming through the chamber's windows. Guardian abilities are strongest when protecting those they love. The emotional connection amplifies the magic. She met Diego's eyes. "That's why I can sense Luna's emotions, why I was able to break that assassin's conditioning so easily." "Because you love her," he said softly. "Because I love both of you." The admission hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Which means that tomorrow night, I won't just be using guardian magic. I'll be using it at full strength." The silence stretched until Torres cleared his throat. If the plan is to use Miss Moreau's abilities to turn their own assassins against them, we'll need to coordinate carefully. Timing will be everything." "Agreed." Diego turned back to the maps, but his hand found Juliette's, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture of partnership that sent shocked murmurs through the assembled nobles. "What do you need?" "Close contact with as many of their people as possible. The conditioning can only be broken through touch, and it takes several seconds for each person." Juliette studied the ballroom layout. "If they attack in coordinated waves, we make sure you're in position for each wave," Torres said, understanding immediately. "Guard rotations that put you where you need to be, when you need to be there." "And if something goes wrong?" Diego asked. "If they realize what you're doing and target you specifically?" Juliette looked around the table at the assembled faces, some friendly, some hostile, all united by the recognition that tomorrow night would determine the kingdom's future. "Then I do what guardians have always done," she said simply. "I protect what matters most, whatever the cost." Diego's hand tightened on hers. "There will be no whatever the cost. We all come through this alive." "Together," she agreed, though privately she wondered if fate would be that kind. As the meeting dispersed and plans began taking shape, Juliette found herself alone with Diego in the chamber. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air between them. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "There are other ways." "Are there?" She moved closer, close enough to see the concern etched in his dark eyes. "Diego, they've been planning this for years. They have magic-controlled assassins, inside knowledge, and the element of surprise. Without guardian magic to level the field, I could die tomorrow night. Luna could die. And you're asking me to stand aside and let it happen because it's safer for me personally?" His jaw tightened. "I'm asking you not to throw your life away for a crown that's brought you nothing but danger." "The crown didn't bring me danger. Love did." She reached up to touch his face, marveling at how right it felt to be this close to him. "The moment I chose to protect Luna, the moment I started caring about both of you, I became a target. That's not going to change whether I fight tomorrow or hide in a closet." "Juliette." "Besides," she smiled, trying to lighten the mood, "you're stuck with me now. Guardian bonds don't break easily." "Is that what this is? A guardian bond?" The question was loaded with meaning that went far beyond magical connections. Juliette felt her pulse quicken as she met his gaze. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never had anything to compare it to. All I know is that when I'm with you, I feel like the person I was meant to be. When I'm protecting Luna, I feel like I'm fulfilling my purpose. And when I think about losing either of you—" "You won't," he said fiercely, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we have to face, we face it together. Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. If I don't make it through tomorrow night, promise me you'll tell Luna that protecting her was the greatest honor of my life." "You'll tell her yourself," Diego said firmly. "Because you will make it through. We both will." Before she could argue, he kissed her, soft and desperate and full of promises neither of them might live to keep. Yet in that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of dead kings and the weight of tomorrow's battle, Juliette felt something she'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that some things were worth dying for, and some people were worth living for. Tomorrow night would determine which truth proved stronger. But for now she had this, Diego's arms around her, the taste of hope on her lips, and the knowledge that whatever came next, she would face it as herself. The Last Guardian, awakened at last. Chapter 11. The Royal Council's Ultimatum. The emergency session of the Royal Council convened 2 hours before sunset, and Juliette knew from the moment she walked into the gilded chamber that she was about to face her greatest battle yet. 12 of the kingdom's most powerful nobles sat around the ancient oak table, their faces ranging from coldly disapproving to openly hostile. At their head sat Duke Aldrich, his expression carefully neutral as he gestured for Juliette to take the chair positioned directly across from them, like a defendant facing judgment. "Miss Moreau," Duke Aldrich began formally, "this council has been convened to address certain irregularities in your position at court." Diego started to speak, but Aldrich held up a hand. "Your Majesty, with respect, the council requests the opportunity to address Miss Moreau directly." "Irregularities?" Juliette kept her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Your rapid elevation from servant to advisor, your unprecedented access to royal chambers and classified military information, your intimate involvement with His Majesty." Lady Margaret Thornfield's voice dripped with disapproval. "Such arrangements are highly irregular, to say the least." "I serve as Princess Luna's protector," Juliette replied carefully. "Nothing more." "Nothing more?" Lord Blackthorn leaned forward like a predator scenting weakness. "Miss Moreau, you've been observed entering the king's private chambers. You wear gowns commissioned specifically for you. You sit at his right hand during war councils." Heat flooded Juliette's cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "My duties require close coordination with His Majesty. Princess Luna's safety depends on—" "Princess Luna's safety," interrupted Duchess Elena Ravencroft. Not the Elena from the garden, but Diego's great-aunt and one of the council's most influential voices. "Yes, let's discuss that. In the month since your arrival, there have been 2 attempts on the child's life. Curious timing, wouldn't you agree?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. "You think I'm responsible?" "We think," Duke Aldrich said carefully, "that your presence has coincided with an unprecedented increase in threats against the royal family. Whether through direct involvement or simply by attracting dangerous attention, the result is the same." Around the table, noble heads nodded in agreement. Juliette felt the walls closing in as she realized the true purpose of this meeting. They weren't investigating her loyalty. They'd already decided she was guilty. "Furthermore," Lady Thornfield continued, "your claimed abilities border on the fantastical. Guardian magic? The bloodline was extinct decades ago. Yet you ask us to believe that you, a slum-dwelling Omega, are somehow the last survivor of an ancient noble line?" "I ask you to believe nothing," Juliette said quietly. "The evidence speaks for itself." "Does it? Or have you simply been fortunate in your timing? Lucky enough to stumble onto assassination plots, quick enough to claim credit for their prevention?" Lord Blackthorn's smile was sharp as a blade. "How convenient that the only person who can verify your guardian abilities is a child too young to understand the difference between magic and clever manipulation." "That's enough." Diego's voice cut through the chamber like a whip crack. "This council was convened to discuss security measures for tonight's celebration, not to conduct a witch trial." "Your Majesty," Duke Aldrich's tone remained respectful but firm, "the council has concerns that go beyond tonight's festivities. Miss Moreau's influence over you has become notable, concerning even." "My influence?" Juliette stood. anger finally overriding caution. Your Majesty makes his own decisions. I've never presumed to do otherwise. Haven't you? Duchess Ravencroft's eyes glittered with malice. You've been observed in His Majesty's private study, reviewing state documents. You've participated in military planning sessions. You've worn Queen Isabella's gown to public functions. The last accusation was a masterstroke, designed to hit every painful nerve. Comparing her to Diego's beloved dead wife, suggesting she was trying to replace an irreplaceable woman. The gown was a gift, Juliette said, her voice barely above a whisper. A gift that sends a very specific message to the court and the kingdom, Lord Blackthorne said smoothly. That His Majesty has chosen his next queen, an Omega from the slums with no family, no connections, no value beyond her personal services. Lord Blackthorne. Diego's voice carried a lethal warning. Your Majesty, please. Duke Aldrich raised both hands in a gesture of peace. We're all loyal servants of the crown. Our concerns stem from that loyalty, nothing else. Then voice your concerns plainly. Aldrich stood, his expression grave. Very well. The Royal Council believes that Miss Moreau represents a clear and present danger to the stability of the monarchy. Whether through deliberate malice or simple recklessness, her presence has made the royal family less safe, not more. Therefore, Duchess Ravencroft continued, we formally request her immediate removal from court, for the good of the kingdom and the safety of the royal line. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the table, 11 noble faces watched for Diego's response with predatory intensity. And if I refuse? Diego asked quietly. Then we regretfully inform you that several major noble houses are prepared to withdraw their support from the crown, Duke Aldrich said heavily. The Northern Territories, the Eastern Duchies, the coastal provinces, all have expressed concerns about the current direction of royal policy. It was a coup disguised as concern, a rebellion wrapped in respectful language. They were threatening civil war unless Diego abandoned her. I see. Diego's voice was dangerously calm. And what would you have me do with Miss Moreau? Simply cast her out to face Lord Westbrook's assassins alone? Protective custody, Lady Thornfield suggested. Somewhere safe and secure, far from court. A comfortable prison, Juliette translated bitterly. A reasonable precaution, Aldrich corrected, until the current crisis has passed and cooler heads can prevail. Juliette looked around the table at 12 faces that held no sympathy, no warmth, no recognition of her as anything more than an inconvenient obstacle to their plans. They would discard her as easily as throwing away a broken tool. Your Majesty, she said quietly. Perhaps the council has a point. Every head snapped toward her in surprise. Diego's eyes widened with shock and something that might have been betrayal. Juliette, no, let me finish. She moved away from the chair, standing alone in the center of the chamber. The council is right about one thing. My presence has brought danger to the royal family. Whether I'm responsible or simply a catalyst, people are trying to kill Princess Luna, and that's unacceptable. So you agree to leave? Duchess Ravencroft asked eagerly. I agree that Princess Luna's safety is more important than my position at court. Juliette met Diego's gaze across the room. But I don't agree that running away will solve anything. What are you saying? Duke Aldrich demanded. I'm saying that Lord Westbrook's plot doesn't disappear if you hide me in some distant castle. His assassins don't lose their conditioning if you lock me away. The threat to the royal family remains exactly the same, except now you've removed the one person who can actually do something about it. She walked slowly around the table, meeting each noble's eyes in turn. You call me dangerous? You're right. I am dangerous. To the people who want to destroy everything this kingdom stands for. You call me an outsider? You're right about that too. I've never learned to play political games or prioritize my own comfort over other people's lives. Miss Moreau, Aldrich began. I'm not finished. Power thrummed in her voice, the awakened guardian magic lending weight to her words. You want to remove me because you're afraid of what I represent. Not danger to the kingdom, but change. The possibility that worth isn't determined by bloodline or birthright or the size of your family's treasury. Around the table, several nobles shifted uncomfortably. You see an Omega from the slums sitting at the king's right hand, and it terrifies you because it suggests that maybe, just maybe, your own positions aren't as secure as you thought. That maybe ability and loyalty matter more than ancient pedigrees. How dare you? Lady Thornfield sputtered. How dare I what? Tell the truth? Juliette's eyes blazed with conviction. Fine. You want me gone? I'll make you a counteroffer. She turned to face Diego directly. Your Majesty, I formally request that you accept the Council's recommendation. The betrayal in his eyes was like a knife to her heart, but she pressed on. Send me away. Lock me up. Remove me from the equation entirely. Juliette, what are you doing? He asked quietly. I'm giving them exactly what they want, she said with a smile that held no warmth. And when Lord Westbrook's assassins strike tonight, when 50 conditioned killers tear through the palace with no one to break their magical control, when Princess Luna dies screaming for help that will never come, the Council can console themselves with the knowledge that at least they maintained proper social order. The chamber fell silent as her words sank in. Of course, she continued conversationally. I suppose you could try to fight 50 magical assassins with conventional forces. I'm sure only most of the royal family will die. The survivors can rebuild from whatever pieces Lord Westbrook leaves behind. You're bluffing, Lord Blackthorn said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Test me. Juliette's voice turned deadly serious. Send me away, and find out what happens when guardian magic isn't available to protect the people who matter most. Duke Aldrich cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miss Moreau, if your abilities are truly necessary for tonight's defense, then maybe, Diego said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority. The Council should reconsider their position. The power dynamics in the room shifted like tectonic plates. 12 of the kingdom's most influential nobles suddenly found themselves trapped between their political ambitions and the stark reality of the threat they faced. Your Majesty, Duchess Ravencroft said carefully, perhaps we could postpone this discussion until after the current crisis. No. Diego stood, moving to Juliette's side. The Council has made their position clear. Miss Moreau stays, with full authority to use whatever means necessary to protect the royal family. Any noble house that finds this unacceptable is welcome to withdraw their support. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing in a gesture of partnership that left no doubt about where his loyalties lay. But they should understand that they're not just withdrawing support from me, they're withdrawing it from the only person standing between this kingdom and complete destruction. Around the table, calculation warred with pride on 12 noble faces. They wanted her gone, but they wanted to survive the night more. Very well, Duke Aldrich said finally. Miss Moreau retains her position for the duration of the current crisis. But this matter is far from settled. Understood, Juliette replied calmly. Just remember, you made this choice. When the history books record tonight's events, they'll note that the Royal Council chose survival over pride. As the nobles filed out, their faces carefully neutral, but their emotions radiating frustration and thwarted ambition, Juliette felt Diego's grip tighten on her hand. That was dangerous, he said quietly. You've made enemies who won't forget. I've made enemies who understand exactly what they're dealing with, she corrected. Sometimes that's more valuable than friends. Through the chamber's tall windows, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. In a few hours, the anniversary celebration would begin, and with it would come the test that would determine everything. But for now, Juliette had won the right to stand and fight. The council had forced her to choose between safety and purpose. She'd chosen purpose without hesitation. Tonight would prove whether that choice would save them all or destroy everything she'd come to love. Chapter 12. Descent into Darkness. The anniversary celebration began like a fairy tale and descended into a nightmare with terrifying swiftness. The great ballroom sparkled with the light of 1,000 candles, while the kingdom's nobility danced beneath crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow prisms across the marble floor. Elaborate gowns swept through graceful waltzes as laughter and music filled the air with magic that felt almost real. Juliette stood at the edge of the festivities, wearing the deep blue gown that had caused so much controversy, her enhanced senses alert for any sign of the coming storm. Her mother's pendant lay warm against her skin, and through their bond she could feel Luna's excitement as the little princess held court in her silver dress among admiring nobles. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. "They're here," she said quietly into the communication crystal Diego had given her. "Where?" His voice crackled back, tense with controlled readiness. Juliette closed her eyes, extending her awakened guardian senses through the ballroom. 3 groups. The first is entering through the servants' corridor behind the orchestra. The second, they're coming up from the old tunnels beneath the wine cellars. And the third. Her blood turned to ice as she felt the familiar wrongness of magically conditioned minds moving through the palace gardens. "They're surrounding us. We're trapped. How long do we have?" "Minutes. Maybe less." She opened her eyes, scanning the crowd of oblivious nobles who continued dancing as death approached on silent feet. "Diego, there are too many. Even if I can break their conditioning, I can't reach them all before they start killing people." "You won't have to." His voice carried grim determination. "Stick to the plan. Save who you can, and trust Torres to handle the rest." The first scream echoed from the servants' corridor, just as the orchestra reached the crescendo of a particularly dramatic waltz. Several dancers paused, confused by the sound, but most continued their steps, assuming it was part of the performance. Juliette was already moving, her guardian instincts driving her toward the threat. She reached the corridor entrance just as the first wave of assassins burst through the doors. 5 men in black leather, their eyes empty of everything but murderous purpose, their movements coordinated with inhuman precision. Behind them, more shadows moved in the darkness. 10, 15, 20 killers flowing into the ballroom like a tide of death. "Everyone get back!" Juliette shouted, but her voice was lost in the music and laughter. The lead assassin saw her and smiled, an expression devoid of humanity, twisted by magical conditioning into something that belonged on a corpse. "Target acquired," he said in a voice like grinding stone, eliminating guardian threat. He moved faster than any human should have been able to, his blade cutting through the air where her head had been a heartbeat before. But Juliette was already in motion, her awakened abilities allowing her to flow around his attack like water around a stone. Her hand found his wrist, and power flowed from her fingers into his conditioned mind. The magic shattered like glass. "What? Where am I?" The man stumbled backward, his weapon clattering to the floor as his free will returned. "What was I doing?" "Fighting for the wrong side," Juliette said grimly. "Stay down and stay alive." But the other assassins were already spreading through the ballroom, and the screaming had begun in earnest. Nobles fled in panic as trained killers moved among them with deadly efficiency, targeting anyone who wore royal colors or bore noble crests. Juliette threw herself toward the next group, but there were too many, moving too fast. For every assassin she freed from conditioning, 3 more emerged from the shadows. That's when the second wave hit. The wine cellar entrance exploded upward in a shower of marble and flame as more killers poured through the breach. These moved differently, not with the mechanical precision of the conditioned, but with the wild fury of Shadowfang rogues. "Luna!" Juliette's heart seized as she saw the little princess standing frozen near the center of the ballroom, her silver dress making her a perfect target in the chaos. She ran toward the child, but a massive rogue intercepted her, his partially shifted claws raking across her shoulder. Pain exploded through her arm, but she managed to dodge his follow-up strike and roll away. "The princess!" she shouted into her communication crystal. "Someone get to Luna!" "On it!" Torres's voice crackled back, and she caught a glimpse of royal guards fighting their way through the melee toward the terrified child. But they were moving too slowly, and the third wave was about to hit. The garden doors shattered inward as the final group of assassins made their entrance, and at their head walked Lord Marcus Westbrook himself, his face twisted with years of carefully concealed hatred. "Kill them all!" he commanded, his voice carrying over the screams and clashing weapons. "Leave no one alive who might challenge our rightful rule." Magic crackled around him. Not the clean power of guardian abilities, but something darker, more corrupt. The conditioning spells that controlled his assassins flowed from him like poison, reinforcing their compulsions and driving them to greater violence. Juliette tried to reach him, knowing that breaking his control over the assassins would end the massacre in seconds. But there were too many bodies between them, too much chaos, too much death. A crossbow bolt sprouted from the wall inches from her head. Another assassin lunged at her with twin daggers, and she barely managed to grab a fallen candlestick to parry his strikes. This was hopeless. There were 50 of them and one of her, and no matter how powerful her guardian abilities were, she couldn't be everywhere at once. That's when she saw Diego fighting his way toward her through the carnage, his sword weaving a deadly pattern of protection around him. Behind him came more royal guards, their armor splashed with blood, their faces grim with determination. "The source!" she shouted to him. "I need to reach Westbrook. He's controlling them all." Diego's eyes blazed with understanding. Without hesitation, he began cutting a path toward the garden entrance, his blade finding every gap in the assassins' defenses. But even as they fought toward their goal, Juliette could see the toll the battle was taking. Bodies littered the ballroom floor, some assassins, but too many innocent nobles who'd been caught in the crossfire. Blood stained the marble in spreading pools that reflected the chandelier's light like dark mirrors. They were losing. For all their preparation, all their planning, the sheer number of attackers was overwhelming their defenses. "Juliette!" Luna's voice cut through the chaos like a silver bell. She turned to see the little princess backed against a pillar, 3 assassins closing in with weapons raised. Torres was fighting desperately to reach her, but he was too far away, engaged with his own group of killers. Time slowed as Juliette faced the impossible choice: continue toward Westbrook and end the massacre, or save the child she'd sworn to protect. There was no choice at all. She threw herself across the ballroom, guardian power blazing from her like starlight as she crashed into the first assassin. Her hands found his throat, breaking his conditioning with a touch, but the second man's blade was already descending toward Luna. Juliette threw herself between them, feeling the steel bite deep into her side as she took the blow meant for the princess. Pain exploded through her body, but she managed to grab the assassin's arm and break his conditioning too. He stumbled away, confused and horrified by what he'd been made to do. "Juliette," Luna sobbed, her small hands pressing against the spreading blood on Juliette's gown. "You're hurt." "I'm okay," Juliette gasped, though she could feel her strength ebbing with each heartbeat. "Stay close to me." But as she knelt bleeding on the ballroom floor, she could see Westbrook across the room, his dark magic growing stronger as more innocents died around him. They'd failed. She'd chosen to save one child over stopping the massacre, and now everyone was going to pay the price for her decision. That's when the third wave of guards burst through the main entrance. Not palace forces, but warriors in unfamiliar armor moving with deadly efficiency as they engaged the assassins. At their head walked Elena Ravencrest, the mysterious woman from the garden, her eyes blazing with power that rivaled Westbrook's corruption. "Guardian!" she called across the chaos. "Now, while his attention is divided." Understanding flashed through Juliette's mind. This was the plan Elena had been working toward all along, not just breaking conditioning but turning the assassins against their true master. With Luna safe in Torres's arms, Juliette struggled to her feet and began moving toward Westbrook again. Each step sent pain lancing through her wounded side, but she pressed on, drawing on strength she didn't know she possessed. The final confrontation was about to begin, and everything, the kingdom, the royal family, the future itself, hung in the balance. Chapter 13. The choice blood flowed down Juliette's side as she fought through the chaos toward Lord Westbrook, each step an agony that threatened to bring her to her knees. The ballroom had become a war zone. Bodies littered the marble floor while survivors huddled behind overturned tables and marble pillars. The beautiful chandeliers swayed overhead, several shattered from stray crossbow bolts, casting fractured light across the carnage below. But the tide was turning. Elena's reinforcements, who were they? Loyalist forces? Former guardians who'd survived the purge? Moved through the assassins with surgical precision. More importantly, several of the conditioned killers had stopped fighting entirely, their programming disrupted by proximity to Juliette's awakened power. "You cannot stop this!" Westbrook's voice boomed across the ballroom as he raised his hands, dark energy crackling between his fingers. 20 years I've planned! 20 years I've prepared! More magic flowed from him, reinforcing the conditioning on his remaining assassins. But Juliette could feel the strain in his power. Maintaining control over so many minds was exhausting even him. She was 30 feet away when the crossbow bolt took her in the shoulder. The impact spun her around, sending her crashing into a marble pillar. Agony exploded through her body, and for a moment her vision went white. "Juliette!" Diego's voice cut through the chaos, and she heard him fighting desperately to reach her. But she was trapped, pinned against the pillar by assassins who'd recognized her as the primary threat to their mission. 3 of them closed in, their eyes empty of everything but murderous purpose. "Guardian bloodline ends here," the leader said, raising his sword for a killing blow. That's when Juliette felt it. A surge of power unlike anything she'd experienced before. Not her own strength, but something deeper, older. The accumulated power of every guardian who'd ever lived, flowing through her mother's pendant into her wounded body. "No," she said quietly, her voice carrying impossible authority. "It begins here." Light exploded from her, washing over the 3 assassins like a wave of pure starlight. But this wasn't just conditioning-breaking magic. This was transformation, change, the power to heal what had been twisted into darkness. The assassins stumbled backward, their weapons falling from nerveless fingers as memories flooded back. Not just their own suppressed personalities, but awareness of what they'd been forced to do, who they'd been made to hurt. We're free," one of them breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Goddess help us. We're free." Around the ballroom, other conditioned killers began to falter as the wave of liberation spread outward. Westbrook's hold on them cracked like ice in spring, and his expression shifted from confidence to desperation. "Impossible!" He poured more power into his control spells, but the magic was unraveling faster than he could reinforce it. "You're just one girl, one broken Omega from the gutter." "I'm a guardian," Juliette said, pulling herself upright despite the bolts in her shoulder and side. "And I'm done hiding what that means." She began walking toward him again, light streaming from her with each step. Every assassin the radiance touched fell to their knees as their free will returned, as the horror of their forced actions crashed down upon them. But Westbrook wasn't finished. With a snarl of rage, he pulled a vial of black liquid from his robes. The same poison they'd tried to use on Luna weeks ago, but concentrated, deadly enough to kill with a single drop. "If I cannot rule," he screamed, "then no one will!" He hurled the vial toward the center of the ballroom, where Luna stood protected by Torres and a circle of guards. The glass container arced through the air, death spinning end over end toward the child Juliette had sworn to protect. Time slowed as Juliette faced her final choice. She could finish freeing the remaining assassins, ensuring the battle was won and the conspiracy crushed forever. Or she could save Luna from the poison that would kill her in seconds. But not both. The poison was already in the air, and even Guardian speed wouldn't be enough to reach both targets. Save the many, or save the one. End the war, or protect the child. For Juliette, there was no choice at all. She threw herself across the ballroom in a desperate leap, her body moving faster than should have been possible. The vial was 3 feet from Luna when Juliette caught it bare-handed, the glass shattering against her palm. Poison burned through her skin like liquid fire, but she'd contained it, kept it from spreading to anyone else. "Luna's safe," she gasped into her communication crystal as the toxin raced through her bloodstream. "The princess is safe." Behind her, she heard Westbrook's final scream as Diego's sword found his heart. Without their master's magic to sustain them, the last few conditioned assassins collapsed, their minds finally free but their bodies exhausted beyond endurance. The battle was won. But as Juliette fell to her knees, poison burning through her veins and blood flowing from her wounds, she realized victory had come at a price she might not survive to see. "Juliette!" Luna's voice was the last thing she heard as darkness closed around her vision. She'd kept her promise. The princess was safe. Everything else was in fate's hands now. Chapter 14. In the Darkness. Death tasted like copper pennies and regret. Juliette floated in a place between worlds, where time moved like honey and memories played out in slow motion. She could see her life spread before her like cards on a table. The hungry child in the lower district, the invisible servant scrubbing floors, the woman who'd chosen courage in a dark alley, and threaded through it all, moments of light. Luna's laughter, Diego's gentle hands, the feeling of finally mattering to someone. "You're not finished yet." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, familiar in a way that made her soul ache with recognition. "Mama?" Isabella Ravencrest materialized from the shadows between heartbeats, looking exactly as she had in the portrait Elena had shown her, young, beautiful, fierce with protective love. "My brave girl. Look how strong you've become. I failed. I couldn't save everyone. The poison. You saved what mattered most. You chose love over glory, protection over victory. That's what guardians do." Juliette felt tears on her cheeks, though she wasn't sure how she could cry in this place between life and death. "But they're still in danger. Without me, Luna has no protection. Without you, Luna. Without you, Luna has no protector," Isabella corrected gently. "But she has something better now. She has someone who taught her that protection comes from love, not duty. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but choosing to act despite it." The spirit realm around them shimmered, and Juliette could see flashes of the physical world. Diego kneeling beside her body, his face streaked with tears as palace healers worked frantically over her still form. Luna clutching her hand, whispering desperate pleas for her to wake up. "They need me. They need you to choose. Life or death, my daughter. The poison can be fought, but only if you want to fight it." "Of course I want to fight it, but I don't know how." Isabella smiled, reaching out to touch Juliette's face with fingers that felt like warm starlight. "The same way you fought everything else. With love. With purpose. With the absolute certainty that some things are worth any sacrifice." Around them, the space between worlds began to brighten, and Juliette felt a pull. Not toward the light that poets wrote about, but back toward the messy, dangerous, beautiful world of the living. "Will I see you again? Every time you look in a mirror. Every time you protect someone who can't protect themselves. Every time you choose love over fear." Isabella's form was already fading, becoming translucent. "I'm so proud of who you've become, little star. Now go. Your real family is waiting." The light grew brighter, and with it came pain. Beautiful, terrible, life-affirming pain that meant her heart was beating, her lungs were breathing, her body was fighting to live. Juliette opened her eyes to find Diego's face inches from hers, his expression cycling through disbelief, relief, and joy so profound it stole her breath. "You came back," he whispered, his voice rough with unshed tears. "I had to," she managed, though speaking felt like swallowing glass. "Someone has to make sure you don't do anything stupidly heroic." His laugh was half sob. "Too late for that. I love you, Juliette. I love you so much, I was ready to tear apart the spirit realm to bring you back. I love you too. The words felt like coming home. Is Luna? Safe, thanks to you. He helped her sit up carefully, and she saw the little princess curled up asleep in a chair beside the bed, her hand still stretched out toward Juliette's. She hasn't left your side in 3 days. 3 days? The poison nearly killed you. Master Physician Garrett said it should have killed you, that no one could survive that much concentrated nightshade. Diego's eyes searched her face. How did you do it? Juliette thought about the spirit realm, about her mother's gentle strength, about the choice between life and death that everyone had to make for themselves. Guardian magic, she said simply. And stubbornness. The most dangerous combination in the kingdom, Diego agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. As she held him close, feeling his heartbeat steady against her chest, Juliette realized something had changed during her journey to the edge of death. The last barriers between them had fallen away, burned off by the intensity of nearly losing each other. They were partners now, equals, guardian and king, heart to heart, facing whatever came next together. What happened to the conspirators? She asked. Dead or captured. Westbrook died in the ballroom. Lady Catherine tried to flee the kingdom but was arrested at the border. Diego's expression darkened. She'll face trial for treason, though I suspect she'll claim she was being coerced. And the assassins I freed from conditioning? Recovering. Most of them were kidnapped as children, just like you were told your parents had been. They're traumatized, but grateful to have their minds back. He paused. Several have asked to serve in the palace guard. They want to atone for what they were forced to do. They don't need to atone for being victims, Juliette said firmly. But if they want to help protect others from the same fate, I think that's beautiful. Luna stirred in her chair, her eyes opening to focus on Juliette with wonder and relief. You're awake! The little princess scrambled onto the bed, careful not to jostle Juliette's healing wounds. I knew you'd come back. I told Papa you were too stubborn to die. She did indeed, Diego confirmed solemnly. She also informed me that if you didn't wake up soon, she was going to march into the spirit realm and drag you back herself. I would have too, Luna said with absolute seriousness. You're my protector. You're not allowed to leave me. Never again, Juliette promised, gathering the child into a careful hug. We're family now. Family doesn't abandon family. Through the window, sunlight streamed into the chamber, painting everything in shades of gold and hope. The kingdom was safe, the conspirators defeated, the future bright with possibility. But more than that, Juliette had finally found her place in the world, not as an invisible servant or a convenient tool, but as herself. Flawed, stubborn, fiercely protective, and absolutely essential. The last guardian, awakened at last, and ready for whatever adventures tomorrow might bring. Chapter 15, New Foundations. 2 weeks after the Battle of Shadows, as the historians would name it, Juliette stood in the palace gardens watching Luna chase butterflies through the rose maze. The child's laughter echoed off the ancient stone walls, bright and carefree in a way that made Juliette's heart sing. To see Luna playing without fear, without constantly looking over her shoulder for threats, was worth every scar she'd earned protecting her. Deep thoughts? Diego appeared at her elbow, offering her a cup of tea that smelled like honey and healing herbs. Happy thoughts, she corrected, accepting the cup gratefully. When was the last time you heard her laugh like that? Too long. Diego's expression softened as he watched his daughter dart between the flowers. The healers say the nightmares are finally fading. She slept through the night for the first time since the attack. Children are resilient. She'll be fine. Will you be? The question was loaded with meaning. Physically, Juliette was healing well. Guardian magic had accelerated her recovery beyond anything the palace physicians had expected. But the emotional aftermath of the battle was more complex. I dream about the ones I couldn't save. she admitted quietly. The nobles who died before I could break enough conditioning to stop the massacre. I know it wasn't my fault, but knowing and feeling are different things. Diego moved closer, his presence warm and comforting. You saved more lives than anyone else could have, including mine. I almost lost you both. The memory of watching that poison vial spin through the air toward Luna still made her breath catch. If I'd been even a second slower, but you weren't. You made an impossible choice and saved the person who needed saving most. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing with familiar comfort. That's what heroes do. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who couldn't stand by and watch children get hurt. Same thing. Before she could argue, Captain Torres approached with the measured stride of someone bearing official news. He'd been promoted to Lord Commander after his exceptional leadership during the crisis, and the new authority sat well on his shoulders. Your Majesty, Miss Moreau, the Royal Council is ready for the final briefings. Right. The aftermath meetings that would determine how to rebuild from the conspiracy's wreckage. Juliette had been dreading them, knowing they would involve more political maneuvering and barely concealed hostility from nobles who still saw her as an upstart. Are you ready for this? Diego asked quietly. Are any of us? The council chamber had been restored since the battle, its walls scrubbed clean of bloodstains and its furniture replaced. But the faces around the ancient oak table were different now. Several empty seats marked nobles who'd been killed or arrested, while new representatives had risen to fill the gaps. Duke Aldrich still presided, his expression carefully neutral as he gestured for Juliette to take her usual seat at Diego's right hand. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Before we begin, Aldrich announced, the Council wishes to formally acknowledge the debt the kingdom owes to Miss Moreau. Her actions during the crisis saved countless lives and preserved the royal line. Polite applause rippled around the table, though Juliette could sense the complex emotions beneath it. Gratitude mixed with resentment, respect tinged with fear. However, Aldrich continued, the crisis has also raised important questions about the future structure of the court and the kingdom. Here it comes, Juliette thought, the careful political maneuvering to limit her influence now that the immediate danger had passed. The Guardian bloodline has been restored, Duchess Ravencroft said, her tone carefully measured. This represents both an opportunity and a challenge for traditional governance structures. Meaning? Diego's voice carried a warning edge. Meaning that Miss Moreau's unique position requires formal definition. For the stability of the realm and the clarity of succession laws. Juliette felt tension coil in her stomach. They were going to try to force her into some kind of rigid role, to contain and control her influence. The council has prepared several proposals, Lord Blackthorne added, producing a thick document. Options for formalizing Miss Moreau's status in ways that honor her service while maintaining proper protocols. Diego's hand tightened on hers. What kind of proposals? Official guardian to the crown, with defined duties and limitations. Royal advisor with specific portfolio responsibilities. Or, Aldrich paused dramatically. Queen consort, with full rights and privileges of royal marriage. The last option hit the room like a thunderbolt. Several nobles gasped, others leaned forward with predatory interest, and the political implications began cascading through every mind present. The council supports this proposal? Diego asked carefully. The council recognizes political reality, Duchess Ravencroft replied. Miss Moreau's influence over your majesty is already established. Her bond with Princess Luna is undeniable, and her abilities make her invaluable to the kingdom's security. Furthermore, Duke Aldrich added, the Guardian bloodline represents an opportunity to strengthen the royal line in ways that haven't been possible for generations. The magical compatibility between Guardian and royal bloodlines is well documented. They were talking about her like breeding stock again, but this time the cage they offered was gilded with royal titles and political power. And if I refuse all three options? Juliette asked quietly. Then you remain in an undefined position that creates ongoing instability, Lord Blackthorn said bluntly. The nobility needs to understand the hierarchy. The people need to know who speaks with royal authority, and potential enemies need to see clear consequences for threatening the crown. In other words, she was too powerful to ignore and too dangerous to leave unconstrained. Your Majesty, Aldrich said formally, the Council requests your decision on Miss Moreau's official status. Diego was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Around the table, 12 noble faces waited for his answer with varying degrees of anticipation and dread. The Council's proposals are noted, he said finally. But the decision isn't mine alone to make. All eyes turned to Juliette. She could feel the weight of the kingdom's future pressing down on her shoulders, not just her own fate, but the precedent this moment would set for generations to come. I have a counter-proposal, she said, standing slowly. A fourth option the council hasn't considered. Which is? Aldrich asked warily. Partnership. Juliette looked around the table, meeting each noble's gaze in turn. Not marriage for political convenience, not advisory roles with hidden limitations, not ceremonial titles that look impressive but carry no real authority. She moved to the great map on the chamber's wall, her hand tracing the territorial boundaries that had been drawn in blood and maintained through fear. For centuries, this kingdom has been ruled by the principle that some people are born to command while others are born to serve. That bloodline determines worth, that titles define value, that power flows only from the top down. Miss Moreau, Duke Aldrich began, I'm proposing we try something different. A system where authority comes from ability, where leadership is earned through service, where the crown exists to protect all its people, not just the wealthy and well-connected. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. This was radical beyond anything they'd expected. You're talking about revolution, Duchess Ravencroft said sharply. I'm talking about evolution, about building a kingdom worth preserving instead of just perpetuating systems that create suffering. And your role in this evolution? Lord Blackthorn asked with obvious skepticism. Juliette turned back to Diego, seeing understanding dawn in his dark eyes. Equal partner. Not consort, not advisor, not ceremonial guardian. Equal partner in reshaping how this kingdom operates. She moved back to the table, placing her hands flat on its scarred surface. I accept the council's offer of marriage to His Majesty, but I want it understood that this isn't a political arrangement or a breeding contract. This is a partnership between two people who've chosen to face the future together, as equals, with the shared goal of building something better than what we inherited. The silence stretched until Diego stood, moving to her side. Agreed, he said simply. In all things, equals. Partners in marriage, in governance, in whatever comes next. Duke Aldrich cleared his throat. Your Majesty, while romantic sentiment is touching, the practical implications, Diego interrupted, are that the kingdom just gained a queen who's already proven she'll die to protect what matters most. I'd say that's a significant upgrade in royal security. And the precedent? A commoner elevated to royal status. Sets exactly the precedent we want to set, Juliette said firmly. That worth isn't determined by birthright. That service matters more than bloodline. That anyone can rise if they're willing to work for it. Around the table, she could see the political calculations spinning through 12 noble minds. Fear warring with pragmatism, tradition battling against the undeniable evidence of her value to the crown. Very well, Aldrich said finally. The council accepts the engagement of His Majesty to Miss Moreau, with the understanding that this represents a new model of royal partnership. And the understanding, Diego added with steel in his voice, that anyone who challenges the Queen's authority will answer to me personally. The meeting dispersed with careful politeness, but Juliette could feel the undercurrents of change beginning to flow through the kingdom's power structures. Later, as they walked through the gardens where Luna still played among the flowers, Diego squeezed her hand gently. Any regrets? He asked. About choosing partnership over safety? about accepting a crown that will make me a target for the rest of my life. Juliette smiled, watching Luna present a bouquet of roses to a marble statue. Ask me in 50 years. I will. As the sun set over the kingdom they would rule together, Juliette felt the weight of the future settling on her shoulders. Not the crushing burden of impossible expectations, but the satisfying heft of work worth doing. She was no longer invisible, no longer disposable, no longer alone. She was exactly who she was meant to be. Chapter 16. The Crown and the Heart. The wedding of King Diego and Queen Juliette took place on the first day of spring, when the palace gardens bloomed with life renewed. Unlike the elaborate state ceremonies of previous royal marriages, this celebration was deliberately different, a festival that welcomed the entire kingdom rather than an exclusive gathering of nobility. Common people stood beside lords, servants mingled with ladies, and the scent of fresh bread from the palace kitchens mixed with expensive perfumes from the court. "You look beautiful," Luna whispered as she adjusted Juliette's train. The little princess wore a gown of pale green silk, her role as flower girl taken with utmost seriousness. Juliette smiled, touching the simple silver circlet that would soon be replaced with the queen's crown. Her wedding dress was elegant but not ostentatious, white silk embroidered with silver thread, cut in lines that spoke of grace rather than grandeur. Around her neck hung her mother's pendant, now openly displayed as a symbol of the guardian bloodline restored. "Are you nervous?" Elena Ravencrest asked from her position near the window. The older woman had been appointed as chief royal advisor, her knowledge of the kingdom's hidden history too valuable to waste. "Terrified," Juliette admitted. "Not about marrying Diego, about everything that comes after." "The crown is heavy," Elena agreed, "but you won't carry it alone." Through the chamber windows, Juliette could see the great courtyard filling with thousands of people. Citizens from every corner of the kingdom had come to witness this unprecedented wedding, not just the marriage of their king, but the elevation of one of their own to the highest position in the realm. "It's time," Captain Torres announced from the doorway. "His Majesty awaits." The procession began with Luna scattering rose petals along the aisle that had been laid through the courtyard. Behind her walked Elena and the other noble ladies, then the palace guard in their dress uniforms. Finally, Juliette stepped into the sunlight to face the moment that would change everything. The crowd's roar was deafening, not the polite applause of court functions, but the genuine joy of people celebrating something that gave them hope. She saw faces in the audience that ranged from tearful joy to skeptical curiosity, but underneath it all was a sense of possibility that made her heart soar. At the end of the aisle waited Diego, magnificent in the royal blue and silver of his house, his crown catching the morning light. But it was his smile that took her breath away, pure happiness unmarked by political calculation or public duty. He was marrying her because he loved her, and everyone present could see that truth shining in his eyes. The ceremony itself was a blend of ancient tradition and deliberate innovation. The high priest spoke the ritual words about the joining of bloodlines and the blessings of the goddess. But when it came time for the vows, Diego and Juliette had written their own. "I promise to stand beside you as your equal," Diego said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "To trust your judgment, respect your strength, and support your dreams. I promise to rule with you, not over you, and to build a kingdom worthy of the sacrifices you've made to protect it." "I promise to be your partner in all things," Juliette replied, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "To share your burdens, celebrate your victories, and face whatever challenges come with courage and love. I promise to serve this kingdom not because I must, but because I choose to, and to never forget that true power comes from lifting others up." The rings they exchanged were simple bands of silver, but when Diego placed the queen's crown on her head, the symbolism resonated through every person present. An Omega from the slums had become their queen. The transformation was complete. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days and became the template for future royal events, inclusive, joyous, and focused on community rather than exclusion. Common people danced in the palace ballroom. Children played in the royal gardens, and the artificial barriers between classes seemed to dissolve in the shared happiness of the moment. But late on the third night, when the last guests had departed and the palace had settled into peaceful quiet, Juliette found herself alone with Diego in their private chambers. "Any regrets yet?" he asked, pulling her close as they stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. "About marrying you? Never." She turned in his arms, studying his face in the moonlight. "About accepting a crown that makes me responsible for every person in the kingdom? Ask me again tomorrow." "I will. Every day for the rest of our lives." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises they would spend decades fulfilling together. "What happens now?" she asked against his lips. "Now we get to work building the kingdom we dreamed about. Starting with education reform, expanding the healer programs, restructuring the taxation system to be more equitable." "I meant what happens now, tonight, in this room with just the two of us." Diego's eyes darkened with understanding and desire. "That depends. Are you asking as my queen or as my wife?" "Both," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him again. "Always both." What followed was tender and passionate and perfect in the way that only comes when two people choose each other completely, without reservation or political calculation. Later, as they lay entwined beneath silk sheets, Diego traced patterns on her bare shoulder with gentle fingers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For choosing this, for choosing us, for being brave enough to step into that alley and save a little girl you'd never met." "Thank you for seeing me," she replied, "for believing I was worth more than the circumstances of my birth. You were always worth everything. It just took me a while to prove myself worthy of you." Through the windows, dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. A new day was starting, and with it would come the challenges of ruling a kingdom, implementing reforms, dealing with political opposition, and navigating the complexities of power. But for now, there was just this: love and partnership, and the quiet certainty that together they could face whatever came next. Juliette had begun her story as an invisible nobody with nothing to offer the world. She would continue it as a queen who understood that true nobility came from service, that real power lay in protection, and that the greatest strength was found in choosing love over fear. The last guardian had found her destiny, and she was just getting started. Chapter 17. Trials of the Crown. 6 months into her reign, Queen Juliette faced her first true test of royal authority, and it came from the least expected source. The delegation from the Northern Territories arrived on a gray autumn morning, their carriages bearing banners that spoke of wealth and ancient privilege. At their head rode Duke Aldrich's nephew, Lord William Ashford, a man whose cold eyes and calculated smile reminded Juliette uncomfortably of the conspirators they'd defeated. "Your Majesty," Lord Ashford said with a bow that was technically correct, but somehow managed to convey disrespect. "We come with pressing concerns about recent innovations in royal policy." They gathered in the council chamber, where the territorial representatives took their seats with the careful positioning of chess pieces. Juliette sat at Diego's right hand, the queen's crown heavy on her head as she faced what was clearly a coordinated challenge to their authority. "Speak plainly," Diego said, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. "The northern noble houses are troubled by certain recent decisions. The elevation of common-born advisors to positions traditionally held by established families, the redistribution of tax burdens that unfairly penalize ancestral wealth, the suggestion that pact territories might be reorganized based on population rather than historical bloodlines." "You object to competent governance?" Juliette asked mildly. "We object to radical changes implemented without proper consultation with the affected parties." Lord Ashford's smile was sharp as winter frost. "Changes that seem designed to diminish the influence of families who have served the crown faithfully for centuries." "Faithfully enough to support a treasonous conspiracy?" Diego's voice carried dangerous undertones. Lord Westbrook's actions were his own. The northern houses had no knowledge of his conspiracy. Ashford spread his hands in a gesture of innocent confusion. We're simply concerned that recent trauma may have clouded judgment about the importance of traditional alliances. The insult was carefully wrapped in diplomatic language, but its meaning was clear. They thought grief and stress had made the royal couple irrational. Perhaps, Juliette said quietly, the northern houses would prefer specific examples of these concerning policies. Very well. Ashford produced a scroll with practiced efficiency. The promotion of Elena Ravencrest to Chief Royal Advisor, despite her complete lack of formal credentials. The appointment of former servants to positions in the Royal Guard. The redistribution of grain reserves to the lower districts without compensation to the noble houses who provided those resources. You mean the redistribution of grain to prevent starvation among our people? Diego corrected coldly. Grain purchased with taxes paid by the northern territories. Grain that could have been sold at market prices to neighboring kingdoms, bringing revenue that would have benefited everyone. Benefited the wealthy, you mean? Benefited the kingdom's financial stability. Ashford's mask of diplomacy was beginning to slip. Your Majesty, we understand that recent events have been traumatic. The attack, the near loss of the Queen, the disruption of court life. Such experiences can understandably affect one's perspective. Careful, Juliette said softly, but her voice carried undertones that made several nobles shift uncomfortably. You're suggesting that personal trauma has impaired our judgment. That's a dangerous accusation to level at your sovereigns. Not an accusation, a concern, shared by many who have the kingdom's best interests at heart. The real challenge was finally out in the open. They weren't just objecting to specific policies, they were questioning the royal couple's fitness to rule. And what would these concerned parties suggest as a remedy? Diego asked, his alpha authority beginning to fill the room like a low-frequency hum. A regency council, temporary, of course, until the stress of recent events has had time to resolve itself. Ashford pulled out another document. The northern houses, in consultation with several eastern and western territories, have prepared a proposal for a governing council that could assist with policy decisions during this difficult period. A council headed by whom? Juliette asked, though she already knew the answer. Senior members of the established nobility, individuals with experience in governance and the wisdom that comes from generational service to the crown. Individuals like yourself? If called upon to serve, yes. The silence that followed was deafening. Around the table, Juliette could feel the political currents swirling, some nobles watching with predatory interest, others shifting uncomfortably as they realized they were witnessing an attempted coup disguised as concerned intervention. Lord Ashford, Diego said finally, his voice deadly quiet. Are you suggesting that the northern territories no longer recognize our authority? We're suggesting that recent policies demonstrate a concerning departure from established governance principles. The kingdom requires stability, continuity, respect for traditional structures. The kingdom requires leadership that serves all its people, not just the wealthy and well-connected. Juliette stood, feeling guardian power begin to thrum through her veins. What you're really objecting to is that we've stopped treating common people as disposable resources for noble profit. Your Majesty, with respect, your background may not have prepared you for the complexities of territorial governance. My background prepared me to recognize oppression when I see it, to understand what it means when policies favor the few at the expense of the many. She moved around the table, and several nobles leaned away from her unconsciously. You want to know what trauma taught me? That systems built on suffering are systems that deserve to fall. Queen Juliette, another northern representative said carefully, surely you understand the need for experienced guidance in matters of state. I understand that you're trying to use my past as a weapon against me. Poor little Omega, too damaged by her experiences to make rational decisions, too unstable to be trusted with real power. Her voice grew stronger with each word. But here's what you failed to consider. My experiences taught me exactly what's wrong with this kingdom's power structures. She reached the head of the table, her presence suddenly dominating the room, despite her relatively small stature. Every policy you've objected to was designed to address real suffering experienced by real people. Education programs for children who would otherwise grow up illiterate. Medical care for families who couldn't afford healing. Fair taxation that doesn't exempt the wealthy while crushing the poor. Policies with good intentions, Lord Ashford said stiffly, but questionable implementation. Policies with demonstrable results. Literacy rates up 15% in 6 months. Malnutrition down by 1/3 in the lower districts. Crime rates are falling as people find legitimate ways to support their families. Juliette's eyes blazed with conviction. Unless your concern isn't about effectiveness, but about losing the cheap labor that comes from keeping people desperate. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Around the table, faces went carefully blank as nobles recognized the truth they'd been trying to avoid acknowledging. Your Majesty, Ashford said finally, the Northern Territories simply want assurance that their traditional rights and privileges will be respected. Your traditional rights to exploit others? Your privileges to profit from suffering? Those particular traditions end with our reign. Diego stood, moving to Juliette's side in a gesture of absolute solidarity. Lord Ashford, you came here ostensibly to express concerns about governance. Instead, you've revealed that certain territories are more interested in preserving unjust systems than building a better kingdom. The northern houses have a choice to make, Juliette continued. Adapt to policies that serve all our people, or continue clinging to systems that serve only yourselves. But understand, we won't be deterred by threats disguised as concern, and we won't be manipulated by attempts to use my past against me. And if the Northern Territories choose to withdraw their support? Then they withdrew it, Diego said simply. But they'll find that kingdoms built on justice tend to be more stable than those built on exploitation. The delegation left that afternoon. Their mission failed, but their intentions clearly revealed. As their carriages disappeared down the long drive, Juliette felt the weight of what had just transpired. They'll be back, she said quietly. Probably with more allies and better prepared arguments. Probably, Diego agreed. But they'll find us ready, and they'll find that people who've tasted freedom don't give it up easily. Through the windows, they could see children playing in the palace gardens, common-born and noble-born together, their laughter carrying on the autumn wind. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimneys of homes where families no longer went to bed hungry. Was I too harsh? Juliette asked. You were honest. Sometimes that's the same thing. Diego pulled her close, his arms warm and reassuring around her. They tried to use your past as a weakness. Instead, they discovered it's your greatest strength. That night, as they reviewed reports of improved conditions across the kingdom, Juliette realized something important had changed. For months, she'd been the former Omega who'd risen above her circumstances. Now, she was simply the queen who refused to let anyone fall back into them. The trials of the crown were just beginning, but she was more than ready to face them. Chapter 18. The Price of Change. The assassination attempt came at dawn, hidden among the morning deliveries like death wrapped in merchant's clothing. Juliette was reviewing education reports in her private study when the explosion rocked the north wing of the palace. Windows shattered inward, sending glass cascading across priceless carpets, while the sound echoed through the stone corridors like thunder. Luna! Her first thought was for the child, sleeping in the royal nursery directly above where the blast had occurred. She ran through smoke-filled hallways, her guardian instincts screaming warnings as she navigated debris and flames. Behind her, she could hear Diego shouting orders to the guards, his voice cutting through the chaos with alpha authority. The nursery was a disaster. The northern wall had partially collapsed, sending stone blocks crashing into the room where Luna should have been sleeping. Dust and smoke made it impossible to see clearly, but Juliette could sense the child's terror somewhere in the wreckage. Luna, where are you? Here. The voice came from beneath an overturned bookshelf. I'm stuck. Juliette found her pressed against the wall behind the fallen furniture, protected by a pocket of space but trapped by debris too heavy for a child to move. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, but she was alive and conscious. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here. Juliette began lifting the bookshelf, Guardian-enhanced strength allowing her to move what should have been impossible. Can you crawl out? Luna wriggled free just as Diego burst into the room with Captain Torres and a squad of guards. His face went white when he saw the destruction, then flooded with relief when he spotted his daughter in Juliette's arms. Thank the goddess, he breathed, gathering them both close. When I heard the explosion, Papa, the bad people came back, Luna whispered against his chest. But Juliette saved me again. Always, Juliette murmured, though privately she was shaken by how close they'd come to disaster. If Luna had been sleeping anywhere else in the room. Your Majesty, Torres interrupted grimly. We need to move you to the secure chambers immediately. This wasn't random. As they were escorted through the damaged palace, Torres provided a rapid briefing. Explosive device hidden in a shipment of books meant for the royal library. The delivery boy disappeared immediately after the blast, probably recruited specifically for this mission. Casualties? Diego asked. 3 servants were injured, but they'll recover. The target was clearly the nursery. Torres's expression was grim. If Princess Luna had been sleeping in her bed instead of behind the bookshelf reading by the window, she would be dead. The unspoken words hung in the air like smoke. In the secure chambers deep beneath the palace, Elena was waiting with intelligence reports and a face like carved stone. It's retaliation, she said without preamble, for your confrontation with the northern delegation last month. Lord Ashford has been building alliances with discontented nobles across the kingdom, promising them that removing the royal family will restore traditional power structures. How many are involved? Juliette asked, settling Luna in a chair and checking her injuries. The cut was superficial, but the child was pale with shock. At least 12 major houses, possibly more. They're calling themselves the Restoration Council, claiming they want to save the kingdom from radical policies that threaten stability. By murdering children, Diego said flatly. By removing what they see as corrupting influences. Elena's eyes met Juliette's with grim understanding. You specifically. They believe that without you, Diego will return to traditional governance models. The truth hit like a physical blow. This wasn't about policy disagreements or political opposition. This was about eliminating her personally, using Luna as leverage to force Diego's compliance. They're wrong, Diego said immediately, reading her expression. If they think your death would make me more by murdering children, Diego said flatly, by removing what they see as corrupting influences. Elena's eyes met Juliette's with grim understanding. You specifically. They believe that without you, Diego will return to traditional governance models. The truth hit like a physical blow. This wasn't about policy disagreements or political opposition. This was about eliminating her personally, using Luna as leverage to force Diego's compliance. They're wrong, Diego said immediately, reading her expression. If they think your death would make me more cooperative, they understand nothing about what drives me. Papa? Luna's small voice cut through the tension. Are the bad people trying to hurt Juliette because she helps poor people? The child's innocent question crystallized everything. Even a 6-year-old could see what the Restoration Council refused to acknowledge, that their real objection wasn't to radical policies, but to the idea that someone like Juliette could rise to power and use it to help others. Yes, little star, Diego said gently. Some people get angry when others try to make the world more fair. That's stupid, Luna declared with the moral clarity of childhood. Helping people is good. It is good, Juliette agreed, pulling the child closer. But some people profit from unfairness, and they'll do terrible things to protect those profits. Torres cleared his throat. Your Majesty, we need to discuss security protocols. The palace has been compromised, and there may be other devices we haven't found yet. Full evacuation? Elena asked. Selective relocation. Move the royal family to the mountain residence while we sweep every inch of the palace. It'll take days to ensure complete safety. The mountain residence, a fortress built by paranoid kings centuries ago, designed to withstand siege and protect the royal line during times of crisis. It was secure, but it was also isolated, exactly what their enemies wanted. No, Juliette said firmly. We don't run. Your Majesty, the risk is that if we disappear into a mountain fortress, the Restoration Council spins it as proof that we're unfit to rule, that we're so unstable we can't even maintain security in our own palace. She stood despite Luna's protests. They want us afraid, isolated, and defensive. I won't give them that victory. Juliette, Diego said carefully, our daughter's safety is my primary concern, but Luna's safety doesn't just depend on physical protection, it depends on maintaining a kingdom worth inheriting. She moved to the secure chamber's tactical map, studying the territorial boundaries that represented so much more than lines on paper. If we let the Restoration Council drive us into hiding, we lose legitimacy. Other discontented nobles will see weakness and join their rebellion. So what do you suggest? Elena asked. We fight back. Not defensively, not reactively, but with the same strategic thinking they're using against us. Juliette traced patterns on the map, her mind racing through possibilities. They're counting on us responding to this attack with fear and isolation. Instead, we respond with strength and transparency. Meaning, we reveal everything. Their identities, their plans, their methods. We show the kingdom exactly what kind of people are willing to murder children to protect their privileges. Torres looked skeptical. Your Majesty, political exposure doesn't neutralize physical threats. They can still send assassins, but it makes those assassins ineffective. Right now, they're operating in shadow, convincing themselves they're patriots fighting corruption. Once their methods are exposed to public scrutiny, they become what they really are, terrorists willing to kill children for political gain. Diego nodded slowly. Public opinion as a weapon. Public opinion as truth. Let the kingdom see who we're really fighting. Not political opponents with legitimate concerns, but extremists who think murder is an acceptable tool for maintaining power. And the security concerns, Elena pressed, the immediate physical danger? We address it by eliminating the threat at its source. Juliette's finger found Lord Ashford's territory on the map. How many of the Restoration Council members have we identified? 8 confirmed, 4 more suspected. Evidence of their involvement? Circumstantial but mounting. Financial transfers, coded communications, coordination of timing. Then we arrest them, simultaneously across multiple territories. Cut off the head of the conspiracy before it can strike again. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. What Juliette was proposing wasn't just law enforcement. It was a coordinated strike against some of the kingdom's most powerful noble families. The political fallout would be enormous, Elena warned. Arresting that many high-ranking nobles simultaneously is exactly what should happen to anyone who tries to murder the royal family, Diego said quietly. The law applies to everyone, regardless of their bloodline. Some territories might see it as tyranny, Torres pointed out. Authoritarian overreach. Some territories might, Juliette agreed. But most will see it as justice, as proof that the crown protects all its people, not just the wealthy and connected. Luna tugged on Juliette's sleeve. Will you catch all the bad people? We'll try, sweetheart. But catching them isn't enough. We have to make sure new bad people don't take their place. How? Juliette knelt beside the child, meeting her eyes directly. By building a kingdom where being good to people matters more than having lots of money, where helping others makes you important, not hurting them. Like you did? Like we all can do, if we choose to. As plans began taking shape for the most ambitious law enforcement operation in the kingdom's history, Juliette felt the weight of the crown settling differently on her shoulders. Not as a burden imposed by circumstances, but as a tool for transformation she was finally learning to wield effectively. The Restoration Council had made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that threatening her family would make her more cautious. Instead, it had made her absolutely ruthless in her determination to protect not just Luna and Diego, but every person in the kingdom who deserved better than living under systems built on fear and exploitation. The price of change, she was learning, was eternal vigilance. But the cost of not changing was so much higher. Chapter 19. The Reckoning. The coordinated arrests began at dawn across 7 territories, executed with precision that spoke of months of careful planning. Juliette stood in the war room watching reports flow in from teams positioned at noble estates throughout the kingdom. Each colored pin on the Great Map represented a Restoration Council member being taken into custody, their carefully laid conspiracy crumbling as royal authority struck back with overwhelming force. Lord Ashford secured, Torres reported from his position coordinating communications. Minimal resistance. His private study contained enough evidence to convict him 10 times over. Lady Margaret Thornfield arrested at her estate, came another report. She attempted to destroy documents, but our people were faster. Duke Aldrich's cousin surrendered without incident, claims he was coerced into participation. One by one, the pins changed color from red to blue as the most dangerous threat to the kingdom's stability was systematically dismantled. But the real test would come in the aftermath. Public reaction? Juliette asked Elena, who was monitoring communications from across the kingdom. Mixed as expected. The common people are celebrating. They see it as justice for families who've oppressed them for generations. The nobility. Elena's expression was carefully neutral. Some are supportive, others are terrified that they might be next. Good, Diego said firmly. Fear of consequences might encourage better behavior. Through the war room's tall windows, they could see crowds gathering in the palace courtyard. Word of the arrests had spread quickly, and people were arriving from across the capital to witness what many were calling the end of noble immunity. Your Majesty, a messenger arrived with urgent news. The prisoners are demanding to address the Royal Council. They claim rights of noble privilege and formal hearings. They'll get formal hearings, Juliette said calmly. Public ones. With all evidence presented openly, all testimony given under oath, all proceedings recorded for history. The messenger's eyes widened. Public trials for noble defendants? Public trials for accused terrorists, Diego corrected. Their noble blood doesn't exempt them from accountability for attempting to murder children. What followed was 3 weeks of proceedings that transformed how the kingdom understood justice. The Great Hall was converted into a courtroom, its galleries packed with citizens who'd traveled from every corner of the realm to witness noble defendants facing the same legal standards applied to common criminals. For the first time in living memory, wealth and bloodline provided no protection from the consequences of criminal action. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing payments to assassins, coded letters discussing elimination of obstacles to restoration, personal journals revealing the depth of their hatred for the upstart Omega, who'd dared to rise above her station. Most damning of all were the intercepted communications discussing Luna specifically. Not as an innocent child, but as a necessary casualty in their campaign to restore traditional power structures. The defendant will rise, announced Chief Justice Blackwell as Lord Ashford's individual trial reached its conclusion. William Ashford, you have been found guilty of treason, conspiracy to commit murder and terrorism against the Crown. Do you have any final statement before sentencing? Ashford stood with the rigid dignity of a man who'd never believed consequences could touch him. Even now, facing execution, his expression carried more anger than remorse. History will vindicate us, he said coldly. We tried to save this kingdom from radical policies that would have destroyed everything our ancestors built. The Crown has forgotten its obligations to the noble families who've served it faithfully for centuries. The Crown has remembered its obligations to all its people, Juliette replied from her position at the judicial bench, including those you would have kept in poverty and ignorance to maintain your own comfort. You speak of obligations? You who rose from nothing to destroy traditions that held this kingdom together for 1,000 years? I speak of justice, of the radical idea that every person has value, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. Her voice carried across the packed hall with absolute conviction. You tried to murder a child because you couldn't accept that power should serve all people, not just the privileged few. Ashford's mask finally slipped, revealing the hatred that had driven his conspiracy. You're an aberration, a mistake that should never have been allowed to happen. When you're gone, and you will be gone, this kingdom will return to proper order. William Ashford, Chief Justice Blackwell intoned, you are hereby sentenced to death for high treason, sentenced to be carried out at dawn tomorrow. The crowd's roar was deafening, not bloodthirsty celebration, but the sound of people who'd finally seen justice applied equally regardless of noble blood or inherited privilege. Similar scenes played out for each defendant. Lady Thornfield collapsed when her death sentence was announced, finally understanding that her noble birth wouldn't save her. Duke Aldrich's cousin, who'd claimed coercion, received life imprisonment when evidence showed his enthusiastic participation in planning Luna's murder. By the end of the 3rd week, 12 nobles had been sentenced to death, 6 to life imprisonment, and 3 to lesser terms for minimal involvement. The message was clear. The crown would protect its people from any threat, regardless of the source. But the real transformation came in the aftermath. Applications for administrative positions are up 400%, Elena reported during their weekly review meeting. People who never would have considered government service now see it as achievable. Education enrollment has increased by 60%, added Master Scholar Hayes, the kingdom's new education minister, a former school teacher whose innovative programs were already showing results. Children from working families now believe learning can change their circumstances. Most significantly, Diego said, reviewing the latest intelligence reports, we've identified no new noble conspiracies. Word has spread that criminal behavior will be prosecuted regardless of bloodline. Juliette nodded, but privately she wondered if they'd simply driven opposition underground rather than eliminating it. Change of this magnitude rarely happened without ongoing resistance. Her concerns proved justified sooner than expected. The letter arrived on a gray morning in early winter, delivered by a messenger who disappeared before guards could question him. Written in elegant script on expensive paper, its contents were brief and chilling. Your Majesty, the Restoration Council was merely the beginning. Deeper roots feed this tree, and cutting visible branches only strengthens what grows in darkness. Your reforms have created enemies you cannot see, in places you cannot imagine. Sleep lightly, Queen of Nothing. The true reckoning approaches. A friend of tradition. Elena studied the letter with professional interest. The paper is from the eastern provinces. The ink is mixed with silver, expensive, distinctive. The handwriting suggests education in the classical style. So we're looking for a wealthy, well-educated enemy from the Eastern Territories, Torres summarized grimly. We're looking for someone who knew about the Restoration Council but wasn't directly involved, Juliette corrected. Someone who watched our response and learned from their failure. Any idea who? Juliette moved to the map, studying the Eastern Territories where opposition to their reforms had been growing despite the public trials. Someone patient enough to let others take the risks while they prepared more carefully. Someone with resources to maintain a conspiracy without leaving obvious evidence. Her finger found one particular territory, vast, wealthy, isolated, and governed by a duke who'd been conspicuously absent from court since the trials ended. Duke Maximilian Ravencrest, she said quietly, Elena's cousin, and one of the few nobles who didn't send representatives to the trials. Elena's face went pale. Max wouldn't... He's family? Family who profited enormously from the old system. Family who stands to lose the most from our reforms. Juliette's enhanced senses picked up Elena's emotional turmoil. Shock, denial, and underneath it all, growing recognition. When did you last hear from him? Months ago. He sent condolences after the assassination attempt, but nothing since. Elena's voice trailed off as understanding dawned. He always said the guardian bloodline was meant to serve, not lead. That I was wrong to help you claim power. The revelation settled over the room like a shroud. If Duke Ravencrest was behind the new threat, they faced an enemy who understood guardian abilities intimately, who had resources to match royal authority, and who felt personally betrayed by Elena's support of Juliette's rise. This changes everything, Torres said grimly. No, Juliette replied, though privately she felt the weight of new dangers pressing down on her shoulders. This changes nothing about what we're trying to build. It just means we have to be more careful about who we trust to help us build it. Through the windows, snow was beginning to fall on the palace gardens, where Luna played with children from across the kingdom. Noble and common together, their laughter proof that change was possible. But somewhere in the Eastern Territories, new enemies were gathering strength for a war that might determine whether that change would survive. The reckoning Elena's cousin promised was coming. Juliette intended to be ready for it. Chapter 20. The Final Stand. The attack came during the spring festival, when the palace gates stood open and the kingdom celebrated renewal with joyous crowds filling every courtyard and garden. But this time, Juliette was ready. Movement in the eastern woods, reported the lookout positioned in the palace's highest tower. Multiple groups, coordinated approach. Numbers? Torres asked through the communication crystal. At least 200. Armed, organized, moving with military precision. Duke Maximilian Ravencrest had learned from his predecessor's failures. Instead of infiltration and subterfuge, he'd chosen overwhelming force during a time when the palace defenses were necessarily relaxed to accommodate festival celebrations. Evacuation protocols, Diego commanded, his voice carrying across the emergency communication network. All civilians to the protected areas, guards to defensive positions. Luna? Juliette asked, her guardian instincts immediately focusing on the child. Safe in the inner chambers with the strongest protective detail we have, Elena confirmed. Despite her family connection to their enemy, she'd proven her loyalty beyond question during the months of preparation. She knows the emergency procedures. Through the palace windows, Juliette could see festival crowds beginning to scatter as word of the approaching threat spread. Families with children ran for designated safe areas, while others, more citizens than she'd expected, moved toward defensive positions alongside the palace guard. The people are staying to fight, she observed with wonder. They have something worth fighting for now, Diego replied, checking his armor one final time. That makes all the difference. The first wave hit the outer gates with precision that spoke of careful planning. Not wild rogues or conditioned assassins this time, but professional soldiers who moved with deadly efficiency through the festival grounds. Guardian abilities? Elena asked as they prepared to join the defense. Ready, Juliette confirmed, though privately she wondered if her powers would be enough against this kind of organized assault. The previous attacks had relied on magical conditioning she could break. This force seemed to be motivated by genuine belief rather than supernatural compulsion. That made them both more dangerous and more tragic. The battle was joined in the great courtyard, where festival decorations became improvised weapons and celebration turned to desperate resistance. Juliette moved through the chaos, her enhanced senses allowing her to coordinate defensive efforts while Diego led from the front with his sword weaving deadly patterns through enemy ranks. But the attackers kept coming, and for everyone that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. We're being overwhelmed, Torres reported grimly. They have too many people, too much coordination. That's when Juliette realized the true nature of their enemy's strategy. This wasn't just about military victory. It was about proving that her vision for the kingdom couldn't protect the people who believed in it. Duke Ravencrest wasn't trying to win the battle through superior force. He was trying to break the spirit of everyone who dared to hope for change. Fall back to the inner defenses, Diego commanded. We'll make our stand at the palace itself. But as they retreated, Juliette saw something that changed everything. Among the attacking force were faces she recognized, not all enemies, but people driven to desperation by circumstances that had nothing to do with political opposition. "Wait!" she called, her guardian senses picking up emotional undercurrents that didn't match a coordinated assault. "Something's wrong." She moved closer to the fighting, extending her abilities to read the attackers' true motivations. What she found made her heart sink. Many of them weren't fighting for Duke Ravencrest's vision of restored noble privilege. They were fighting because they'd been told their families would die if they refused. Others believed they were defending their homeland against foreign invaders. Still others had been convinced that the royal family had been replaced by imposters who would destroy everything they held dear. They're not all enemies, she realized. Most of them are victims. What? Diego paused in his retreat, confusion clear on his face. Ravencrest isn't just using military force. He's using the same manipulation tactics as the original conspirators. Lies, coercion, false information designed to turn innocent people into weapons. The understanding transformed her approach entirely. Instead of focusing on defense against enemies, she began moving toward the attackers with her guardian abilities fully extended. "Juliette, what are you doing?" Elena called out in alarm. "What I was born to do," she replied, walking directly into the heart of the battle. "Breaking the conditioning that turns good people into tools for evil." The first attacker she reached, a young man whose terror and confusion were written clearly across his face, stopped mid-swing as her power touched his mind. Where am I?" he stammered, looking around in bewilderment. They told me my village was under attack." "Your village is fine," Juliette said gently. "You've been lied to, used to fight a war that has nothing to do with protecting your home." She moved to the next attacker, then the next, her abilities cutting through layers of deception and manipulation to reveal the truth underneath. One by one, confused and frightened people stopped fighting as they realized they'd been weaponized against innocent targets. But not all of them were victims of deception. "Stop right there, Pretender Queen." The voice cut through the chaos like a blade, and Juliette turned to face Duke Maximilian Ravencrest himself. He stood at the entrance to the courtyard, magnificently dressed in battle armor that spoke of ancient privilege, his face twisted with years of carefully nurtured hatred. "You've corrupted everything," he continued, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet battlefield. "Perverted the natural order, convinced peasants they deserve power, taught servants to think themselves equal to their betters." "I've taught people to believe they have value," Juliette replied, standing alone in the space between armies. "That worth comes from character, not bloodline." "Character?" Ravencrest laughed bitterly. "You speak of character while you destroy institutions that have maintained peace for centuries? While you elevate criminals and outcasts over families that have served faithfully for generations? I speak of justice, of the radical idea that everyone deserves the chance to rise based on their actions rather than their birth circumstances. And this is the result!" He gestured toward the chaos around them. "War, division, the breakdown of everything that made this kingdom strong. This war was started by people who couldn't accept losing their power to exploit others," Juliette countered, "by nobles who thought murder was preferable to equality." "Equality!" The word dripped with contempt. "There is no equality in nature. The strong rule, the weak serve, and pretending otherwise leads only to chaos." Around them, the manipulated attackers were beginning to understand what they'd been drawn into. Many were laying down their weapons, their faces sick with realization. Others were moving away from Ravencrest entirely, no longer willing to fight for someone who'd lied to them so completely. But the Duke's true believers, maybe 50 hardened fanatics who genuinely shared his vision of noble supremacy, were closing ranks around their leader. "You want to know about strength?" Juliette asked, her guardian power beginning to blaze around her like starlight. "Let me show you what real strength looks like." She reached out with her abilities, not to attack, but to reveal truth. Every person in the courtyard suddenly felt the emotional reality behind the conflict. The fear and desperation that drove the manipulated attackers, the genuine love and hope that motivated the palace defenders, and the cold, calculating hatred that fueled Ravencrest's fanaticism. "You're the one who's weak," she continued, her voice carrying impossible authority. "So weak that you can't imagine a world where your privilege doesn't depend on others' suffering. So frightened of change that you'd rather destroy everything than adapt to justice." "I am Duke Maximilian Ravencrest," he roared, drawing his sword, "heir to 1,000 years of noble blood. I will not be lectured by a slum-born pretender." "You're a man who spent his entire life being told he was special because of who his parents were," Juliette said sadly, "instead of learning to be special because of who you chose to become." The final duel was brief and decisive. Ravencrest had skill, training, and decades of experience with weapons. But Juliette had something more powerful, absolute clarity about what she was fighting for. When his blade fell from nerveless fingers and he collapsed to his knees, defeated not by superior force, but by the weight of his own moral bankruptcy, the last organized resistance to the kingdom's transformation died with him. "It's over," Diego said quietly, joining her in the sudden stillness that had fallen over the courtyard. "This part is over," Juliette agreed, looking around at the aftermath of the battle. "But the work continues. All these people who were lied to, manipulated, turned against their own interests, they need help. They need healing. They need a reason to believe that change can make their lives better instead of worse." "And Duke Ravencrest?" Juliette looked down at the broken man who'd been willing to destroy a kingdom rather than accept that his privileges weren't divinely ordained. Prison, medical care for his injuries, and maybe, if he's willing to listen, the chance to learn that power can be used to lift people up instead of keeping them down. As the cleanup began and the wounded were tended to, Juliette realized that this battle had been different from all the others, not because the stakes were higher, but because the victory was more complete. They hadn't just defeated their enemies, they'd revealed the truth about what those enemies really represented. And in that revelation, they'd won something more valuable than any military triumph: the hearts and minds of people who now understood what they were truly fighting for. The transformation of the kingdom was finally, genuinely complete. Chapter 21. Forever. After 5 years after the Battle of the Spring Festival, Queen Juliette stood in the same courtyard where she'd faced down Duke Ravencrest, watching a very different kind of gathering. Representatives from 12 neighboring kingdoms had come to witness the signing of the Valdez Accord, a revolutionary treaty that would extend the principles of their reformed government to allied territories across the continent. "You've started something bigger than one kingdom," observed Queen Isabella of the Western Realms, a sharp-eyed woman whose own territory had been inspired to implement educational reforms after seeing their results. "We've proven something that needed proving," Juliette corrected, "that governments can serve all their people, not just the wealthy. That change is possible when people have hope instead of just fear." Around the courtyard, the evidence of that change was visible everywhere. Children from every social class played together while their parents, former servants, and former nobles collaborated on trade agreements and cultural exchanges. The artificial barriers that had once divided society had been replaced by genuine partnerships based on mutual respect. "How do you maintain it?" asked King Marcus of the northern provinces, a young ruler who'd inherited a kingdom rife with inequality. "The constant pressure to return to traditional power structures? By making sure everyone benefits from the new structures," Diego replied, joining their conversation with Luna at his side. The princess, now 11 and already showing signs of becoming a formidable leader, listened to political discussions with the serious attention of someone who understood she would inherit this transformed kingdom. "The old system worked by keeping most people desperate while convincing them their suffering was natural," Juliette explained. "The new system works by giving everyone opportunities to improve their circumstances through their own efforts." And when people see their lives getting better, they don't want to go back to the way things were, Luna added with the wisdom of a child who'd grown up watching her parents build something unprecedented. King Marcus smiled. Your daughter has a good grasp of practical politics. Our daughter, Juliette corrected gently, her hand finding Diego's. In every way that matters. Through the crowd, she caught sight of other success stories. Elena Ravencrest, now serving as the kingdom's ambassador of diplomatic innovation, was deep in conversation with foreign ministers about expanding educational exchange programs. Captain Torres, promoted to Lord Marshal, was demonstrating new training techniques that emphasized protection over dominance. Even some of their former enemies had found places in the transformed kingdom. Several nobles who'd initially opposed the reforms now served in administrative roles where their organizational skills were valued while their ability to exploit others was constrained by oversight and accountability. Your Majesty, a young page approached with a message scroll. The afternoon session is ready to begin. The treaty signing ceremony took place in the Great Hall, where portraits of ancient kings looked down on representatives from across the known world. But instead of the rigid hierarchy that had once defined such gatherings, the seating arrangements reflected the new principles, mixing rulers and advisors, nobles and commoners, creating conversations across traditional boundaries. The Valdez Accord, Diego announced as he prepared to sign the historic document, represents our shared commitment to governance that serves all people, to justice that applies equally regardless of birthright, to the radical idea that every person deserves the chance to rise based on their character and efforts. As each representative added their signature to the treaty, Juliette felt the weight of what they'd accomplished. Not just the transformation of one kingdom, but the beginning of a movement that would reshape how power operated across the continent. Mama, Luna whispered during the ceremony, are you happy? Yes, sweetheart. Are you? I'm excited, Luna replied thoughtfully, about all the things we still get to build. That evening, as the visiting dignitaries celebrated in the palace ballroom, Juliette found herself back in the gardens where her journey had truly began, where Elena had first told her the truth about her heritage and destiny. Any regrets? Diego asked, joining her among the roses that bloomed more beautifully now that the palace's magical atmosphere had been cleansed of the corruption that had once poisoned it. About accepting a crown that turned me into a target for the rest of my life? About choosing responsibility over safety? She smiled, thinking of all the moments that had led them here. The terrified Omega in a dark alley, the invisible servant who'd found her voice, the guardian who'd learned to transform pain into purpose. Ask me in another 50 years. I will, he promised, pulling her close as they watched their guests dance through the windows. Do you think it will last? She asked. Everything we've built, everything we've changed? Some of it will. Some of it will evolve into things we never imagined. And some of it will require defending by people who haven't been born yet. Diego's arms tightened around her. But the important thing isn't whether our specific solutions last forever. It's that we proved better solutions are possible. Through the gardens, they could hear Luna's laughter as she played with children who would grow up in a world where their worth wasn't determined by their parents' status. Where education was a right, not a privilege. Where power came with responsibility instead of impunity. She'll do better than we did, Juliette said with certainty. She'll do differently than we did, Diego corrected, which is exactly what each generation should do. As stars appeared overhead and music drifted from the ballroom, Juliette reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them here. From invisible Omega to Guardian to Queen, each transformation had required choosing courage over comfort, purpose over safety. But the most important choice had been the first one, in a dark alley, when she'd heard a child scream and decided that some things were worth risking everything to protect. Everything else had followed from that single moment of refusing to be invisible when it mattered most. Ready to go back to our guests? Diego asked. Ready, she agreed, though privately she was content to stay in the gardens forever. holding the man she loved while their daughter's laughter echoed through the night. But there would be time for quiet moments later. Right now, they had a kingdom to celebrate, allies to honor, and a future to build one choice at a time. The last guardian had found her destiny in becoming the first queen to prove that true power came from lifting others up rather than keeping them down. And she was nowhere near finished with the work. 20 years later, as Queen Juliette watched her daughter Luna's coronation, she marveled at how different this ceremony was from her own. Luna stood before the assembled crowd, not as someone accepting a burden, but as someone claiming a tool she'd been trained to use wisely. The kingdom she would inherit was prosperous, just, and strong, not because it crushed opposition, but because it had learned to transform challenges into opportunities for growth. "Proud?" Diego asked, his hair now silver but his love unchanged. "Grateful," Juliette replied, "for every choice that brought us here." In the crowd, she could see faces that told the story of their transformation. Former enemies who'd become allies, children of servants who now served as ministers. A guardian bloodline that had grown from one hidden survivor to a thriving community dedicated to protection and service. Princess Luna, soon to be Queen Luna, spoke her coronation oath with a voice that carried absolute conviction. "I promise to serve all the people of this kingdom with wisdom, justice, and love. To protect the vulnerable, challenge the powerful when they abuse their position, and never forget that true nobility comes from character, not birthright. I promise to build on the foundation my parents laid while having the courage to envision what comes next." As the crown settled on Luna's head, Juliette felt the satisfaction of work well done and dreams successfully passed to the next generation. The invisible Omega, who'd once scrubbed floors while believing she deserved nothing better, had become the queen who proved that everyone deserved the chance to become their best self. And in the end, that transformation had changed not just her own life, but the entire world. The greatest magic is not in changing what is, but in helping people see what could be. Final entry in the personal journals of Queen Juliette Valdez,